You've been misled about what detachment truly is. They told you it means not caring, not feeling, shutting yourself off from the world. They told you detachment is weakness, a kind of escape, a way of surrendering. But if that were the truth, why is it that the people who cling the tightest suffer the most? Why do we hold so desperately to people, expectations, and outcomes, only to drown in anxiety, disappointment, and fear? The reality is that detachment is not about losing anything. It's about gaining everything. It isn't emptiness, it's spaciousness. It is freedom. It is the power to love without chains, to give without fear, to live without being enslaved by forces you cannot control. For centuries, Buddhism has preserved this wisdom. Detachment is not indifference, but inner strength, clarity, and courage. When you loosen your grip, life begins to flow again. When you stop forcing, what is truly yours comes naturally in its own time. And as these words reach you, something within you will begin to soften. The heavy weight of expectations will start dissolving. The endless what-ifs that haunt your mind will begin to fade. And in their place, you will taste a freedom you may have forgotten was possible. When tomorrow comes, you will see with new eyes. If something is meant for you, it will come, not through clinging, but through release. This is not just another thought to entertain. It is a transformation in how you live. A threshold into power, clarity, and peace. The question is, are you ready to cross it? Let us begin. What if the word you feared is actually your greatest liberation? Now that the doorway to this truth is open, let us take our first step into the lesson. A lesson so often distorted, misrepresented, and misunderstood. Detachment in the modern world has been given a false identity. It has been confused with coldness, with apathy, with the shutting down of the heart. Many hear the word and immediately imagine walls being built, emotions numbed, love being withdrawn. But this is not detachment at all. That is indifference, and between the two lies an entire world of difference. Think of it this way. Indifference is a closing, detachment is an opening. Indifference hardens the heart, detachment softens it. Indifference numbs the spirit, detachment awakens it. When you are indifferent, you step back from life, turning away from the world. When you are detached, you step more deeply into it, yet without chains. This distinction is not minor. It transforms how you love, how you endure suffering, how you walk through existence itself. Ever built a wall to protect your heart, only to realize it trapped you inside? To truly grasp detachment, we must first examine what it is not. Indifference is a shield, often worn by those who have been wounded. It feels safer to whisper, "I don't care," than to admit how much we actually do. Indifference shuts down the current of life, convincing you that feeling nothing will protect you. But here lies the hidden tragedy. When you block out pain, you also block out joy. When you guard yourself from loss, you also guard yourself from love. Indifference is not real strength. It is fear masquerading as strength. Detachment, however, is an entirely different way of being. It is not the shutting down of emotion, but the liberation of it. It is the capacity to love fully without being consumed, to act wholeheartedly without being enslaved by results, to face the shifting tides of life without breaking every time the winds change. Imagine holding life in open palms instead of clenched fists. What changes? Detachment is spaciousness. It is the gentle ability to hold life with open palms instead of clenched fists. And in that openness, compassion flows naturally. You may wonder, how could letting go possibly make me more compassionate? Isn't love about holding tightly, about never releasing? But real love has never been about possession. Think of the sun. It radiates warmth, light, and life across the world. Yet it does not grasp, it does not cling. It shines simply because shining is its nature, not because it expects something in return. This is what detachment makes possible. What if your worth wasn't measured by how tightly someone holds you back? When your sense of worth is no longer chained to how others respond to you, when your heart is free from needing love to be returned in a certain way, you can give more purely. You can love for the sake of love itself, not for the sake of being needed. Indifference looks at another's suffering and says, "That is not my concern." Detachment looks at that same suffering and says, "I will help in the ways I can, but I will not drown alongside them." Do you see the difference? One is absence. The other is presence guided by clarity. Indifference withdraws because it does not want to feel. Detachment remains, but without being consumed by clinging to outcomes. And it is in this remaining, in this staying without chains, that compassion takes root and grows. Why does the tightest grip often crush what it tries to protect? Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from clinging, the desperate attempt to hold on to what cannot remain unchanged. We cling to relationships, to success, to possessions, to identities. And when they shift, fade, or disappear, we suffer. Detachment is the medicine for this suffering. It does not tell you to abandon life or to abandon people, but to release the illusion that you can freeze them in place. To loosen your grip, to care deeply, but without the belief that you can control impermanence. That loosening is what makes compassion possible. Because when fear of loss no longer enslaves you, you can meet others more openly in their pain. Picture a parent's love. One suffocates, one sets free. Which one truly loves? Think of a parent who clutches their child too tightly, trying to control every step, every choice, every move. That grip may come from love, but it suffocates, turning love into control. Now think of a parent who guides, supports, and loves, but also lets the child stumble, discover, and grow. Which love feels freer? Which love carries more compassion? It is the detached parent, because their love is not ownership, but freedom. This is why detachment is not indifference. Indifference would not care at all. Detachment cares deeply, but without the urge to possess. What if shutting down dulls your soul while letting go sets it on fire? Here lies another truth. Indifference dulls your humanity, while detachment awakens it. When you are indifferent, you shut yourself away from the vibrancy of life, the highs, the lows, the depth of experience. But when you are detached, you allow yourself to feel everything fully, while anchored by an inner strength that does not collapse under the weight of constant change. Detachment is not an escape from living. It is the very capacity to live fully, with the wisdom that life cannot be controlled. Have you ever caught yourself shutting down emotions, thinking it's a sign of strength or spiritual growth? Many mistake emotional numbness for enlightenment. They believe to be spiritual is to never grieve, never ache, never be shaken. But Buddhism does not ask us to destroy our emotions. It asks us to see them clearly as they are. Indifference blinds us. Detachment sharpens our vision. A detached person can weep, can laugh, can ache, can rejoice. But they do not chain themselves to those states as if they were permanent. They flow with them, as one flows with a river, knowing that no hand can hold water in a closed fist. Ever wondered why turning cold feels like the ultimate escape hatch from pain? And yet, why does indifference feel so appealing? Because it promises a false safety. When you convince yourself you do not care, you think you shield yourself from disappointment. But in shielding yourself from disappointment, you also bar yourself from connection. You may avoid heartbreak, but you also avoid intimacy. You may avoid failure, but you also avoid growth. The price of indifference is nothing less than life itself. Detachment, however, does not promise safety. It promises freedom. The freedom to love without fear, to act without chains of expectation, to walk through impermanence with grace. What if feeling everything deeply actually made you more alive, not less? And in that freedom, you are not numb. You are more alive than ever. Compassion is born in that freedom because you can sit with another's suffering without needing to control it, without rushing to fix it just to soothe your own discomfort. Have you noticed how often people try to solve the pain of others not out of love, but because they cannot tolerate suffering? Indifference looks away. Control tries to erase it. Detachment does something different. It allows you to be present with it, to witness it, to help where you can, without demanding that it disappear for your own peace. This is why detachment and compassion are inseparable. Imagine a word that captures compassion born from seeing life's constant flux. Does it change how you show up for others? Buddhism calls this K-A-R-U letter 1E47 a macron, compassion that arises from wisdom. And that wisdom is this: all things change. When you truly see this, you no longer cling to fixing the unfixable. You love, you serve, you give, but you release the need for the world to bend to your will. This is detachment in its purest form, Not coldness, not escape, but a union of clarity and kindness. Indifference builds walls of distance. Detachment builds bridges of freedom. When you are indifferent, people feel invisible. When you are detached, people feel free. And it is in that freedom that love flourishes. What does real love look like when it's free from the grip of possession? What is love, if not the ability to desire the best for another without needing to possess them? Consider a friend who listens without judgment, who supports you without forcing you to change just to make them comfortable. That friend is detached, not indifferent. Their care is unconditional, not chained to their personal expectations of how things should turn out. Now compare that with someone who pulls away, refusing to be involved because they don't want the weight of another's struggle. That is indifference, and it leaves the heart feeling abandoned. Ever faced a moment at work or in love where pulling back seemed easier than staying open? Life continually places us in situations where this difference is tested. In work, detachment allows us to give our best, to pursue excellence, without being shattered by failure or swollen with pride by success. In love, detachment allows us to cherish another deeply without fearing that their loss will end our world. In our personal growth, detachment allows us to strive sincerely without collapsing into despair when progress is slow. Indifference, however, poisons all of these. It makes us withdraw, it makes us quit, it disconnects us from what matters most. What if the next time you say, "I don't care," it was a signal to dig deeper? So the real question is this: how do we practice true detachment rather than slide unconsciously into indifference? The answer begins with awareness. The next time you hear yourself say, "I don't care," pause and ask, is this truth or is this armor? Am I closing myself off because I am afraid to feel? Detachment is never afraid of feeling. It welcomes feeling but does not seek to own it. Awareness reveals the motive behind your stance, and in seeing clearly, you gain the power to choose differently. Picture everything in life as a passing wave. How would that shift your grip on the present? It also lies in remembering impermanence. When you accept that everything is shifting, fluid, and temporary, you no longer clutch at life trying to hold it still. Indifference says, "I will not feel, so I will not suffer." Detachment says, "I will feel everything fully, knowing that both joy and sorrow will eventually pass." That acceptance becomes the soil in which compassion grows, because only when you accept impermanence can you meet people as they are, without trying to force them into your illusion of control. What if the barrier to deeper connection wasn't a wall, but an invitation to step through? And so, detachment is not a wall, but a doorway. It is an opening into deeper love, deeper clarity, deeper connection. It allows you to live without being broken by each shift, while keeping your heart open to every experience. Indifference hides behind walls, protecting itself from the very pulse of life. Detachment stretches out its arms and says, "I cannot control you, but I can walk beside you." This subtle shift changes everything. It is the difference between a life half-lived and a life fully embraced. The difference between fear pretending to be strength and strength born of wisdom. The difference between emptiness of heart and fullness of spirit. Once you taste true detachment, can you ever confuse it with numbness again? And once you see this difference clearly, you cannot mistake one for the other again. For once you discern between detachment and indifference, a new question arises quietly but powerfully. If we are not meant to cling, then what becomes of our actions? Do our choices still matter if we release the results? This is where the wisdom of karma and detachment converge. They teach us that our actions indeed carry weight, that every word, every deed, every intention shapes the path we walk. Yet the freedom lies in not trying to own the outcome. Ever thought karma was just a cosmic scorecard keeping track of your good and bad deeds? There is a common misunderstanding about karma, as if it were some kind of cosmic prize and punishment machine, handing out rewards for good deeds and punishments for mistakes. But this is not karma's essence at all. What if every action was like dropping a pebble into a pond, ripples guaranteed, but the pattern unpredictable? Karma is not a judge seated in the heavens, handing out rewards or punishments. It is far simpler and far more profound. It is the law of cause and effect. Every thought, every word, every action sends ripples into the fabric of life, just as a stone dropped into still water creates waves. This is not a threat. It is simply the nature of reality. And here is where detachment becomes essential. To act with clarity, to give your best effort, to plant seeds with care, while releasing the need to control when, how, or even if those seeds will grow. Why do we suffer most when life doesn't follow our scripted happy ending? The trouble begins when karma is mixed with attachment. We cling to outcomes, believing that life owes us results according to our personal timeline and vision. We think, if I work this hard, I must succeed. If I love this deeply, I must be loved in return. If I do good, life must reward me with ease. And when life refuses to match the story we wrote in our minds, suffering appears. Detachment breaks this cycle. It whispers, do the work, but do not claim the harvest as yours. Offer your effort fully, but let the results unfold in their own way, in their own time, even if you are not there to witness the bloom. Ever noticed how acting purely for the act itself lights up your entire being? In Buddhism, this spirit is known as right action. You act not to bargain with the universe, not to guarantee a specific return, but because the action itself is aligned with wisdom, compassion, and integrity. The intention behind the deed is pure, and detachment from the outcome keeps the heart light, unburdened, and free. This is why karma and detachment are not opposites but companions. Karma ensures that every action carries ripples through existence. Detachment ensures that you are not shackled to those ripples. Together, they allow you to walk through life with sincerity, without drowning in expectation. How exhausting is it to tie your entire self-worth to a single number, title, or outcome? Consider how draining it is to measure your worth solely by outcomes. A student studies but ties their entire sense of value to a grade. An employee works diligently yet ties their dignity to a promotion. A parent raises a child but chains their identity to how that child turns out in adulthood. In all these cases, the effort itself becomes poison, tainted by fear, pressure, and obsession with results. But with detachment, the same student studies because learning is a joy in itself. The worker gives their best because excellence carries its own meaning. The parent loves because loving is their very nature. Detachment removes the burden of ownership and restores the simple joy of action. What if a farmer's quiet persistence in the face of unpredictable weather held the secret to inner peace? There is an old story of a farmer who planted seeds faithfully each year. Some years the rains came on time and the harvest was plentiful. Other years, drought burned the soil and the fields yielded little. Yet the farmer never ceased planting, nor did he rage at the heavens when the rains failed. He did what lay within his power and accepted what lay beyond it. This is karma with detachment. You plant, you tend. You give your energy wholeheartedly, but you do not bind your peace to the weather. Ever let success puff you up or failure crush you, only to realize both are just passing feedback? This principle transforms our view of both success and failure. Seen through the eyes of attachment, success inflates the ego and failure crushes it. But seen through the eyes of detachment, both success and failure are nothing more than feedback, signals from life itself, guiding us to adjust, refine, and continue. Nothing more, nothing less. What if your ego's desperate grab for victory was the real illusion holding you back? The ego longs to seize victory and push away defeat, to wear triumph as a crown and deny failure as a stain. But detachment sees through this illusion. It recognizes both success and failure as passing clouds drifting across the sky, temporary, weightless, without power to define who we truly are. In this way, karma is not a prison but a patient teacher. And when we release ownership of outcomes, something extraordinary unfolds. The fear of failure begins to dissolve. Why do we hesitate, silence ourselves, or hold back our gifts out of fear of the unknown? So much of human hesitation is born from clinging to results. We avoid risks because we cannot bear the idea of things going wrong. We silence our voice because we fear rejection. We hold back our gifts because we are attached to how they might be received. Yet when action is embraced for its own sake, when we act simply because it is aligned with truth, beauty, or compassion, fear loses its grip. Can you imagine creating, speaking, or helping purely because it feels like breathing? The artist paints not to collect applause, but because painting is their breath. The speaker shares not to chase approval, but because the truth demands to be spoken. The hand of kindness reaches out not for recognition, but because compassion is its natural flow. This is the freedom that detachment offers. When we no longer measure life through outcomes, courage awakens, and with courage, peace follows. How many sleepless nights have you spent rehearsing tomorrow's worries? Consider how many nights are lost to restless tossing, to rehearsing endless scenarios, to worrying over what tomorrow may bring. This is attachment in disguise, the desperate attempt to control what was never ours to control. Detachment, by contrast, is stillness. It whispers, I have acted with care. I have given my best. Now I release. What unfolds belongs to life, not to me. Peace is born not from certainty, but from trust, from the willingness to walk with karma, and yet let go of ownership. What if letting go of results didn't mean doing nothing, but acting with even more fire? It is important, however, to clear a common misunderstanding. Detachment from outcomes does not mean passivity. It does not mean folding your arms and leaving life to chance. The teaching is not to do nothing, but to act fully. Act with presence, integrity, and compassion, while surrendering the demand for a particular result. Detachment is not inaction. It is pure action, untainted by fear, obsession, or bargaining with the universe. Ever felt your focus sharpen when worry about what if finally fades away? In fact, when you stop obsessing about what might happen, your energy becomes sharper. Action itself becomes more skillful, more alive, more effective, because nothing is wasted on fear. This balance reveals itself most clearly in the practice of mindfulness. What happens when you pour your whole self into the now, without needing a trophy at the end? Mindfulness means to meet the present moment completely. Whether cooking a meal, working at a desk, or listening to a friend, the act itself becomes whole. It does not need validation from an external outcome. A mindful cook pours love into the dish, not because it will be praised, but because the act of cooking is sacred. A mindful worker offers their best not because recognition is guaranteed, but because excellence itself is meaningful. Karma will carry these ripples forward, yet detachment ensures the heart is not chained to them. Have you ever held a flame in the wind and felt it burn you? Now imagine protecting it without dimming its light. The Buddha once warned that clinging to the fruits of action is like holding a burning torch in the open wind. For a time, you may succeed in holding it steady, but eventually the flames will turn inward and scorch your hand. Detachment, however, is like placing that same torch inside a lantern. The light still shines, it still illuminates the path, but it no longer burns the one who carries it. Actions done without clinging are safer, purer, and ultimately far more powerful. In love, have you ever given with one hand while secretly tallying debts with the other? And in the realm of relationships, this principle becomes life-changing. Too often, we give with hidden strings attached. We offer affection while secretly demanding it be returned. We do favors with the silent hope of receiving gratitude. We listen, but only in exchange for being heard. And when these expectations are unmet, resentment quietly takes root. What lurking expectation turns your generosity sour when it's not reciprocated? This is the shadow of attachment, the hidden expectation that love, effort, or goodness must return on our terms. Detachment lifts this burden. It allows us to love and serve without keeping score, without turning relationships into silent ledgers of debts and repayments. Karma ensures that every act of love and kindness sends ripples into the world in some form. But detachment frees us from demanding when, where, or how those ripples return to us. The result is cleaner, lighter, freer connections, relationships without hidden contracts. Why do good people sometimes bitter when the world seems unfair? Detachment also reshapes how we see justice. Often people act with sincerity, only to feel bitterness when kindness goes unnoticed or when unfairness seems to be rewarded. The mind whispers, Why should I give if others take? Why should I strive if dishonesty prospers? Here, karma reminds us that no action vanishes. Every cause creates an effect, even if it unfolds beyond our sight. Detachment reminds us not to obsess over seeing the scales balanced before our eyes. Together, they teach patience. You do what is right not because of the guarantee of reward, but because it is right. You trust that life itself carries balance, even if the rhythm is slower than your own. Ever push through exhaustion only to crash because the win never came? This way of living also guards against burnout. Attachment to outcomes is one of the greatest drains on human energy. Activists burn out when their efforts for change do not produce instant transformation. Workers burn out when years of devotion are met without the recognition they hoped for. Parents burn out when sacrifices are met with silence instead of gratitude. But detachment from results sustains the spirit, because the effort itself becomes the reward. You act not from the hunger for validation, but from alignment with values. And alignment has its own power, a renewable flame that does not run dry. Picture tending a garden while trusting the rain you can't command. Does that ease your daily grind? The harmony of karma and detachment is deeply practical in ordinary life. Imagine someone planting a garden. They prepare the soil, water the earth, tend the plants with patience. That is karma, cause and effect in motion. Yet they also know that rain, sunlight, and seasons have their part. To demand that the flower bloom today on their command would only create frustration. But to do the work with care and trust the forces of nature, that is detachment. And when the flower finally blooms, they rejoice, not with the arrogance of saying, "It happened only because of me," but with humility, honoring both their own effort and the unseen forces that shape the result. What if claiming all the credit for success, or all the blame for failure, was missing the bigger picture? This practice breeds humility. When you are attached to outcomes, you claim ownership of everything. I alone caused this success. I alone bear this failure. But reality is more intricate. Countless conditions converge for every outcome. Detachment helps you recognize your part without inflating it. You did your share and life did its share. This humility prevents pride from swelling when success arrives, and softens self-blame when failure appears. And humility, in turn, ripens into compassion. Ever judge someone's flop as laziness or their win as sheer luck, only to eat your words later? For when you are trapped by attachment, judgment comes easily. You assume another's failure is laziness, or another's success means they are more deserving. But when you grasp the balance of karma and detachment, you see that outcomes are never born from one cause alone. They are woven from countless threads. This vision softens judgment and opens space for kindness. Why do we scroll through others' highlights and feel our own life shrinking in comparison? Detachment also frees you from the endless cycle of comparison. When worth is measured by results, the eyes constantly wander. Who has more wealth, more recognition, more achievements? The heart grows restless in comparison's shadow. But when the focus shifts to pure action, comparison fades. You are no longer acting to prove your worth, but because the action itself is aligned with truth. Envy dissolves, insecurity loosens its grip, and in its place arises a quiet contentment. What if setbacks didn't break you but simply rerouted your strength? Another gift of this practice is resilience. Detachment does not shield you from difficulties, but it transforms your relationship with them. You can meet setbacks without collapse because your peace is not chained to outcomes. You can continue to act, to plant, to give, even when the harvest is delayed. This resilience is not the cold endurance of gritted teeth, but a steady strength born of trust, the trust that actions matter, even when results are beyond your control. Ready to peel back one more layer of what true freedom from ownership reveals. And there is still one more layer to this teaching, one more depth to uncover. Freedom from ownership also brings with it freedom from guilt. So many people carry heavy burdens of regret, endlessly replaying old memories, tormenting themselves with outcomes they could never have controlled. Detachment softens this weight. It reveals that you acted with the knowledge, the awareness. and the capacity available to you at that time. Outcomes were never entirely yours to command, nor were they solely yours to bear. This recognition does not excuse harmful actions, nor does it erase responsibility, but it does dissolve the unnecessary suffering of clinging to what is already finished. Detachment opens the door to learning, to growth, and ultimately to release. What does it feel like to carry both full responsibility and total freedom in the same breath? To live with both karma and detachment is to live in balance, with responsibility and with freedom. Responsibility, because you understand that every thought, every action, every choice creates ripples that move outward into the world. Freedom, because you know those ripples are not yours to own, not yours to control, not yours to chase endlessly. This balance is the middle path, neither passive resignation nor obsessive control. It is a way of living that combines engagement with lightness, action without bondage, love without fear. Once this balance roots in your heart, can you hear the quieting of endless what-ifs? When this way of being truly settles into the heart, something shifts. The restless noise of what if and what next begins to quiet. The mind no longer bargains with life, no longer demands guarantees at every turn. The heart no longer trembles under the weight of holding the universe in its hands. You still act, you still give, you still love, you still strive. But now you move freely, without the chains of needing to control every result. And this freedom is not escape. It is clarity, it is strength, it is peace. It is the very foundation upon which the deeper layers of detachment are built. But what if, even after letting go of outcomes, you're still chained to the clock? Yet, once we begin to see that our actions are not ours to own, and that karma unfolds in its own rhythm, another veil arises. A subtler form of attachment appears. For if detachment means acting without clinging to outcomes, why do we still find ourselves restless, tapping our feet, whispering to life, when? When will my efforts bear fruit? When will love come? When will success finally appear? This obsession with timing becomes its own invisible chain. Even when we release outcomes, we may still clutch at clocks. Ever caught yourself mentally ticking off life milestones like a checklist, feeling behind if they're unchecked? There is a hidden anxiety buried within the question of when. It whispers that life is moving too slowly, that we are falling behind, that something essential is missing until the future delivers what we crave. And yet, the future never arrives in the exact way we demand. We create silent calendars in our minds and then measure our worth against them. At this age, I should be married. By this stage, I should be wealthy. By now, I should be healed, successful, enlightened. Each timeline becomes a ruler, and the more we measure ourselves against it, the smaller we seem. What name do you give that inner thirst that masquerades as a harmless sense of urgency? This pressure is not truth. It is simply another mask of craving. Buddhism calls it tanha, thirst, the restless desire that disguises itself as urgency. It convinces us that peace will only arrive once certain conditions are met. But detachment from timelines dissolves this illusion. Life has never bowed to our calendars. It has always moved with its own seasons, with its own mysterious timing. Seeds sprout not when we shout at the soil, but when conditions quietly ripen. Wounds close not when the mind demands it, but when the body is ready. To cling to when is to fight against the natural unfolding of things. And it is this fight, more than time itself, that exhausts us. How does frantically trying to hurry a river only leave you soaked and still waiting on the bank? The mind believes that by packing, worrying, and planning, it can control time. But time is no servant to our anxiety. No amount of grasping can force the river to flow faster. The paradox is clear. The more tightly we cling to when, the further peace slips away. But when we finally loosen this grip, when we let go of timelines, we step into trust. Not blind trust, not passive waiting, but the deep recognition that life ripens in its own rhythm, and that rhythm is wiser than our demands. Is waiting passively the same as trusting actively, or is there a fire in the patience? This trust is not laziness, nor is it passivity. It is clarity. It gives us permission to act, to prepare, to plant seeds with devotion, yet without swallowing the poison of impatience. Attachment to timing often feeds another shadow, comparison. We glance at the lives of others and feel as though we are behind, that they are somehow ahead while we lag in the dust. But life is not a race with a single track. Each being has a season, and every path ripens in its own time. Detachment teaches us that another person's harvest does not mean our soil is barren. It simply means their season is now, while ours is still unfolding. To force a bloom before its time only harms the plant. In the same way, to shove ourselves into a timeline that does not belong to us only deepens our pain. What riches in the present moment have you missed while chasing a future that keeps slipping away? When we release the clenched grip on when something unexpected happens, we rediscover the present. All the waiting, all the rushing, all the restless packing blinds us to what already surrounds us. Obsession with the future robs us of the richness of now. Detachment from timelines gently brings us back to the only place we can truly live, the present moment. And often, within this very moment, we find that the peace we were chasing, the joy we believed was waiting in some distant tomorrow, is already available here, if only we stop demanding that life move faster. Ever assumed your perfect plan was smarter than life's unpredictable detours? There is also a subtle arrogance hidden in timeline attachment. We act as though we know the perfect schedule for our lives, as though our maps and calendars could dictate the universe. But how many times have detours turned out to be blessings? How many delays revealed themselves as perfect timing? How often has what we judged as too late become exactly right? Detachment humbles us. It bows to the mystery, reminding us that life's timing carries a wisdom far greater than our own. To release when is to surrender the illusion of control and to begin listening instead of demanding. Does the ache of longing have to chain you, or can it coexist with open-hearted steps forward? This is not to say that waiting is easy. The human heart aches in longing, it stings in delay. Detachment does not deny this, it does not numb or suppress. It simply allows the ache to exist without letting it tighten into chains. It whispers, yes, I feel the hunger for what is not yet here, but I will not allow this hunger to poison the meal already on my table. I will keep walking, I will keep planting. But I will not be enslaved by impatience. This balance keeps hope alive without letting it curdle into despair. Why rush healing with deadlines when gentleness might be the fastest path? The weight of timelines also presses hard in the realm of healing. We scold ourselves with silent deadlines. By now I should be over my grief, over my heartbreak, over my mistakes. But the heart has its own quiet clock, one that no calendar can dictate. Detachment from timelines in healing means offering space. Space for wounds to close at their own pace. Space for tenderness to do its slow work. Forcing speed only tears the wound deeper. Gentleness and patience are themselves part of the cure. In your quest for awakening, is speed the enemy of true depth? Even in spiritual practice, the grip of timelines can become a hidden trap. We hunger for enlightenment quickly, for transformation immediately, for wisdom on demand. But awakening is not a race to be won. It is not a finish line on a calendar. It is a lifelong unfolding, like dawn slowly rising over mountains. Detachment from timing is essential here, for the very desire to arrive quickly feeds the ego we are learning to release. A flower does not bloom because it is impatient. It blooms because it is ready. What if the peace you've been postponing until later was waiting in the step you're taking right now? In the same way, clarity does not arrive on command, nor does it bend to our demands. It emerges when the soil of our life is ready, when conditions ripen, when silence and patience have done their quiet work. To release ourselves from the prison of timelines is to let life become lighter, more fluid. Instead of endlessly chasing the next milestone, we begin to notice the beauty of the step we are already taking. We discover joy in the very act of walking, rather than exhausting ourselves for the finish line. The destination no longer holds us hostage because we realize that peace was never waiting there. It was possible all along in the journey itself. This freedom from rigid timing does not ask us to abandon ambition or to dissolve our goals. It only invites us to hold them gently, without binding our happiness to a deadline. Think of the artist who grips their masterpiece too tightly, demanding it be completed by a fixed hour. Creativity suffocates under such pressure. But when the artist loosens their hold, allowing the process to breathe, the work unfolds naturally, sometimes slow like a stream, sometimes bursting like rain, but always alive. This is the hidden power of letting go of when creativity is released, urgency dissolves, and life's own rhythm becomes the guide. This teaching also transforms how we see aging. Many suffer under the illusion that life is moving too fast or too slow, that they are too young for certain dreams or too old for others. But these judgments are nothing more than timelines dictated by society, not by truth. When we detach from such comparisons, we step out of the tyranny of too late or not yet. We remember that every age has its own treasures, every stage its own wisdom. Chasing an artificial schedule only blinds us to the possibilities of the present. The practice of releasing the grip on timing is indeed a surrender, but not the surrender of defeat or weakness. It is the surrender of deep trust, the kind that knows life cannot be commanded but can be embraced. To release when is to recognize that we do not control the unfolding of existence, yet we can meet it fully, with integrity and presence. This surrender is not passive resignation, it is active acceptance. It allows us to act where action is needed, to rest when rest is wise, and to live without drowning in the bitterness of unmet deadlines. To walk this way requires patience, but not the heavy patience that clenches its jaw and waits in suffering. It requires the lighter patience of openness, the patience that whispers, "I will walk with life at its pace, not at the pace of my fear." Such patience is not a burden. It is a liberation. It lifts the heart from the endless chase and replaces it with a quiet trust that what is meant will arrive at its appointed hour. And so detachment from timelines reveals itself as a doorway to freedom. It unravels impatience, dissolves comparison, softens the arrogance of thinking we know best, and calls us back to the fullness of the present moment. To let go of when is not to stop caring. It is to stop clinging. It is to love, to act, to create, but to let each season of life unfold in its natural rhythm. Within that rhythm lies peace. Within that rhythm lies freedom. And within that rhythm lives the quiet, unshakable truth. What is meant for you will never pass you by, and what is not meant for you will never remain, no matter how desperately you chase. When this truth settles deep into the heart, the restless question of when begins to dissolve. With it, the suffocating weight of urgency fades. What remains is a gentler way of living, one guided not by clocks and deadlines, but by trust, presence, and the rhythm of life itself. Steady, open, and free. That is the space that begins to emerge when the grip of timelines loosens. Yet beneath that release, another subtle layer of attachment quietly reveals itself, one even deeper than impatience. It is the constant pull of desire, the restless craving that whispers endlessly that life will only be complete once we finally gain what we seek. Desire has often been painted as the enemy of peace, as if wanting itself is proof of weakness or lack of spirituality. But the Buddha did not simply condemn desire as something to be killed or denied. Instead, he showed that desire can be a mirror, a compass, even a teacher, pointing us directly to the attachments and fears we cannot yet see. To walk the path of true detachment is not to hate desire, but to listen to it with honesty and care. Desire has its own voice, and often it grows louder the more we try to silence it. The moment we tell ourselves, "I should not want this," the wanting intensifies. Repression does not bring freedom. It only drives desire underground where it festers and multiplies. The wiser way is to meet it openly and ask, what is this longing trying to reveal? What unspoken need lies beneath this craving? In this way, desire ceases to be an enemy and becomes a teacher. When we look closely at what we crave, we uncover the invisible chains of attachment that bind us to restlessness. Consider the person who longs endlessly for recognition. The desire itself is not evil. It points to the deeper bondage of self-worth being tied to the approval of others. Or take the desire for control in relationships. That craving often conceals the buried fear of abandonment or betrayal. Without desire to expose these wounds, they would remain unseen. In this sense, unmet desires act like lanterns, casting light into the hidden corners of the mind where attachment quietly dwells. The danger comes when we mistake the surface desire for the solution. We chase wealth believing it will bring security, when the real hunger is for an inner sense of safety. We chase beauty believing it will bring love, when what we long for is to feel truly seen and valued. We chase power believing it will bring freedom, when the deeper craving is to be free of vulnerability. Each desire is like a signpost. If we follow it blindly, we become lost in endless craving. But if we pause, study it, and trace it back to its root, the signpost becomes a doorway to wisdom. Buddhism teaches that tanha, or craving, is one of the roots of suffering, because it binds us to the illusion that fulfillment lies outside of ourselves. But this truth is not meant to demonize desire. It is meant to free us from its grip by showing us how to transform it. When desire is seen clearly, it ceases to enslave us. The fire of craving, when understood, becomes the light of awareness. The very force that once bound us becomes the energy that sets us free. This shift in perspective also transforms how we meet frustration. Unmet desires are no longer seen as punishments or failures, but as mirrors. The job that slips away is a mirror reflecting our attachment to identity through career. The unreturned love reveals our attachment to being chosen. The delayed success uncovers our attachment to external validation. These experiences strip away illusions and reveal the exact places where our freedom is still incomplete. And there is a tenderness hidden within this teaching. When we recognize desire as a teacher, we stop shaming ourselves for wanting. Too often, spirituality is twisted into harshness, into self-rejection, as though any longing proves weakness. But to want is to be human. The path is not to deny desire, but to study it with compassion, to follow it gently back to its root, and to see what it unveils about our attachments. This softens our practice, allowing growth with patience rather than with self-condemnation. Desire also reminds us of impermanence. Notice how the object of craving shifts over time. What you burned for 10 years ago may no longer matter today. The obsession that once consumed you might now appear small, even irrelevant. Desire, in its changing nature, becomes yet another teacher, showing us that no craving lasts forever. To see this clearly is to loosen our grip, to smile gently at our longings, and to remember that they too rise and pass away. The desires of childhood fade into the desires of adulthood, and those too eventually dissolve into something else. Each stage of life carries its own cravings, yet all of them pass like waves returning to the sea. By watching the changing face of desire, we begin to understand a profound truth. No single object of craving can ever be the final answer. This realization does not make desire vanish, but it loosens its grip, because we see clearly that every promise it makes is temporary. Unmet desires also expose how often we confuse means with ends. We imagine that the object we seek is the goal itself, yet in reality it is usually only a placeholder for something deeper. A person may crave wealth, but beneath that pursuit lies the longing for stability and safety. Another may chase admiration, but beneath that hunger lies the yearning to feel seen and worthy. When surface desires are denied, the deeper need is revealed. This unveiling is uncomfortable, even painful, yet it is through that discomfort that genuine growth emerges. Another gift of desire as a teacher is the way it shows us where we have handed away our own power. Each time we declare, "I cannot be happy until I have this," we surrender our freedom to something external. By noticing this pattern, we are offered the chance to reclaim our strength. We begin to realize that while desires may continue to arise, our peace does not need to be chained to their fulfillment. This recognition is not cold indifference, it is liberation. In practice, this means that when desire arises, we pause before rushing to satisfy it. We ask deeper questions. What is this longing pointing toward? What wound, what fear, what hidden belief is hiding beneath this craving? This shift does not mean denying pleasure or rejecting goals. It means engaging with desire consciously rather than blindly. We may still choose to pursue what we want, but now we move with awareness instead of compulsion. This single difference changes everything. The pursuit becomes lighter, freer, less desperate. It also reshapes how we view failure. If we see desire only as an enemy, then failure becomes unbearable because it traps us in craving with no way out. But when we see desire as a teacher, failure itself becomes instruction. Each disappointment reveals where we were attached, where we expected life to obey our will. In this sense, unmet desires become some of the most powerful teachers of all, because they strip away illusions faster than success ever could. This perspective softens how we view others as well. When we realize that everyone's desires point to hidden attachments and unmet needs, we stop judging people for what they chase. Instead of mocking someone for running after fame, wealth, or status, we look deeper and see the universal longing beneath. The wish to feel safe, to be valued, to know love, to be free. And when we see this, judgment gives way to compassion. We recognize in their striving the same human yearning that beats in our own hearts, the longing to feel whole. Viewed in this way, desire reshapes motivation itself. Instead of being pulled blindly by craving, we begin to act from clarity. We still pursue relationships, goals, and success, but we no longer deceive ourselves into believing that any of these things will finally complete us. They may enrich our lives, but they are not life's foundation. This subtle shift transforms the very quality of our striving. Effort becomes lighter, less frantic, less desperate. We engage fully in the world, but without the heavy illusion that our wholeness depends on the outcome. In spiritual practice, unmet desires often mark turning points. A meditator may crave blissful states, only to discover that clinging to them blocks true awakening. A devotee may long for visions, signs, or miracles, only to find that the chase itself distracts from genuine transformation. In these moments, desire becomes both obstacle and teacher, forcing the seeker to see beyond the glittering lure of spiritual highs. The craving itself reveals the very grasping that must be released. True freedom lies not in getting everything we want, but in stepping beyond the endless cycle of wanting altogether. This journey is not about erasing desire from the human heart. It is about transforming our relationship to it. When desire arises, instead of declaring, "This is bad," we can say, "This is a lesson." Each longing becomes a question, each craving a mirror. And when we dare to look into that mirror, we find not only our attachments, but also the path toward freedom itself. What is this longing pointing toward? Where within me am I still clutching and refusing to release? What illusion am I nourishing each time I chase it? By turning desire into inquiry, the very force that once enslaved us begins to transform into fuel for awakening. There is beauty in this recognition, for it is desire itself that draws us to the path in the first place. The yearning for truth, the longing for peace, the hunger for freedom, these two are desires. Without them, the journey of awakening would never even begin. Buddhism does not ask us to snuff out this spark, as if all desire were poison. Instead, it asks us to refine it, to elevate its energy. Over time, crude and fleeting desires evolve into noble longings, for wisdom, for compassion, for liberation itself. Desire, in its higher form, guides us closer to freedom. To detach from desire does not mean to deny life's natural pull. It means to hold desire lightly, to listen to it without fear, to learn from it without becoming its servant, and finally to release the illusion that it alone contains the key to our wholeness. Desire is not the true enemy. It is ignorance of desire, our blindness to its hidden motives, that keeps us bound. Once seen clearly, desire loses its grip. We are no longer trapped in its coils. We can honor its message, thank it for what it reveals, and let it go, moving forward with greater clarity and peace. In this way, unmet desires are never curses. They are guides in disguise. They illuminate the attachments we must face, the illusions we must dissolve, and the truths we must embrace. When desire is treated as a teacher, every craving, every frustration, every disappointment becomes an opportunity to grow in wisdom. And this wisdom, once lived and embodied, becomes the foundation for a deeper freedom, the kind no fulfilled desire could ever provide. For fulfilled desires fade, but wisdom remains. And yet, once we begin to see desire in this new light, another, even deeper question arises. Who is it that desires? Who is the one claiming ownership over longings, failures, and even progress on the path? Beneath every craving, every attachment, every illusion, there lies a subtle voice whispering, "This is me. This is who I am." It is the voice of identity, the mask of the ego, and it is perhaps the most difficult attachment of all to loosen. Unlike possessions or relationships, which we can point to and release, identity feels inseparable from existence itself. We can recognize the danger of clinging to wealth. We can admit the pain of clinging to timelines. But clinging to identity hides itself so deeply that we often mistake it for truth. The ego's most cunning disguise often appears in spiritual growth itself. We may begin the path sincerely, longing to be free from suffering, yearning to understand life with greater depth. But as progress unfolds, the ego slips quietly back in through a side door, wearing new clothes. No longer does it say, "I am wealthy, I am successful." Instead, it whispers, "I am wise, I am spiritual, I am enlightened." What once looked like liberation slowly hardens into another chain, this time gilded in the language of awakening. This is why detachment from identity is perhaps the most subtle and the most profound practice of all. To understand why identity clings so fiercely, we must first look at how the mind builds it. Identity is not a solid reality but a construction of stories, the inner narrative that repeats, "This is who I am." These stories can be woven from achievements and failures, from roles and relationships, from beliefs and labels. Some are outward-facing. "I am a teacher, I am a parent, I am a healer." Others are inward-facing. "I am strong, I am broken, I am spiritual." None of these stories are inherently harmful on their own. They help us navigate the world. But the danger arises when we cling to them as absolute, when we mistake the story for the self. When life contradicts the stories we cling to, suffering quietly begins. If your identity is tied to being wise, every mistake suddenly feels like a threat to who you are. If your self-image is bound to being compassionate, every flicker of anger becomes a source of shame. In this way, identity itself hardens into a prison. Within spiritual practice, this danger is even more deceptive because the labels seem noble and harmless. To call oneself awakened or spiritual feels uplifting, even inspiring. But the tighter we grasp these identities, the more subtle forms of pride and fear take root. Pride appears through comparison. "I am more awakened than others." Fear emerges as insecurity. "What if I lose my progress? What if others no longer see me as spiritual?" Both pride and fear expose the grip of attachment. The image of being spiritual becomes a weight to carry rather than a doorway to freedom. Detachment from identity does not demand the erasing of individuality. It is not the denial of self-expression. It is simply loosening our grip on the stories we repeat, recognizing that they are passing roles, not eternal truths. Just as a child eventually outgrows their clothes, we are meant to outgrow identities. Yet when we cling to them, we resist growth. The irony is sharp. In the name of growth, many become trapped in the identity of the one who grows. In chasing spirituality, they cling to the mask of being spiritual, and in doing so, block the very liberation they seek. The Buddha himself warned of this subtle trap, calling it Sakkayaditha, the view of self. He taught that suffering persists as long as there is clinging to I, me, mine. Even the identity of I am awakened is still bondage. Genuine detachment asks us to release not only objects, not only desires, but also the very sense of self that insists on clinging. Without this release, even spiritual practice can turn into another possession, another mask of ego. One way to see this clearly is to observe how identity reacts when challenged. If someone questions your beliefs, do you bristle with defensiveness? If someone doubts your wisdom, do you flare up in anger? These reactions reveal the grip of identity. When identity is held lightly, challenges are not threats, they become invitations. But when identity is clung to, every challenge feels like an attack on existence itself. Detachment from identity transforms criticism into a lesson, failure into growth, and uncertainty into openness. It dissolves resistance and allows humility to blossom naturally. For there is also a hidden exhaustion in clinging to identity. To maintain the story of who you think you are requires endless effort. If you are attached to being kind, you feel compelled to suppress every trace of anger. If you are attached to being strong, you must hide every weakness from others. If you are attached to being spiritual, you are forced to constantly perform wisdom, as though life were a stage. This performance grows heavy because it is fueled not by sincerity, but by the fear of being exposed as something less. Detachment lightens this weight. It allows you to simply exist without carrying the burden of image. It does not mean indifference to growth, it means sincerity in growth. When you are no longer attached to the identity of being spiritual, you can engage in practice with honesty, not performance. You meditate because it clears the mind, not because it makes you appear enlightened. You show compassion because compassion arises naturally, not because you want others to call you kind. This detachment purifies motivation, stripping away the ego's clever disguises. It also nurtures humility, for identity clings to comparison. Who is ahead? Who is behind? Who is superior? Detachment dissolves this endless measuring. The path is no longer a race, but a journey unique to you. Humility arises like a quiet fragrance because without the mask of ego, there is no need to appear greater or lesser than anyone else. The journey becomes about truth, not image. And as detachment deepens, the fluidity of self is revealed. When we stop clinging, we begin to see that identity is not fixed at all, but shifting and impermanent. You are not the same person you were yesterday, nor will you be the same tomorrow. Roles, beliefs, emotions, and qualities rise and fall like waves upon the ocean, appearing for a time, then dissolving back into silence. To hold on to a single wave is to be pulled beneath it and drown. To release it is to discover rest in the vastness of the ocean itself. This is the deeper awareness, the ocean that carries all waves yet clings to none. It is the ground of being that receives everything, but is never bound by anything. When this is seen, suffering begins to change. For so much of our pain is born from the belief that this is me. When sadness arises and the thought forms, I am sad, the sadness feels permanent, as though it has fused with identity. When failure arrives and the thought echoes, I am a failure, the weight becomes unbearable, for the whole of self feels stained. But when the grip of identification loosens, a subtle but life-altering shift occurs. Sadness becomes simply, sadness is here. Failure softens into, failure has happened. The experiences still unfold, they still hurt. Yet they no longer define the one who experiences them. In this small space of freedom, healing begins. The self is no longer a prisoner of one frozen moment. The danger arises when ego, dressed in spiritual robes, takes hold. Instead of dissolving identity, it merely exchanges costumes. The mask of wisdom, the mask of purity, the mask of enlightenment. These masks are often heavier than worldly ones, for they appear noble and virtuous, yet still they bind. True detachment requires a deeper courage. The courage to release even the identity of being the one who has let go. This courage is no small matter. To loosen identification feels like dying, for the ego whispers with fear, without me, nothing will remain. Yet what falls away is not life, but illusion. What remains is what has always been. Awareness itself, the silent witness beyond every role and label. To rest here is to taste the essence of detachment. It is not emptiness in the sense of nothingness, but spaciousness and unshakable freedom. It is not absence, but presence without clinging. And here lies the paradox. Only when we give up the need to appear spiritual do we embody true spirituality. Only when we stop clinging to the idea of awakening do we discover awakening itself. Detachment from identity clears away the subtle traps of ego. It allows practice to return to what it has always been meant to be: a homecoming to simplicity, a resting in clarity, a freedom that needs no names, no masks, no performances. When this truth is lived, even the phrase "I am spiritual" dissolves. There is no compulsion to declare, to compare, or to prove. There is only the quiet, steady unfolding of awareness itself. And in that unfolding, the ego's disguises slip away. What is revealed is that freedom has never been about perfecting identity, but about releasing the very need for one at all. And as these masks fall, something even more profound shines through. We see that all roles, all stories, all self-made images are stitched together by a single fragile thread: the illusion that anything can last. Every attachment, to people, to success, to status, even to the idea of myself, is a refusal to face the truth of impermanence. Nothing we touch, no matter how precious or painful, will remain unchanged. The ego resists this truth with all its might, longing for stability, permanence, guarantees. But the heart is liberated the moment it bows to reality. Everything will pass. Impermanence is not a curse or punishment. It is the very rhythm of existence. Every breath bear witness. No inhale can last forever. And yet, because it passes, there is space for the next. It must always give way to exhaling. No breath can linger without end. The seasons turn, the body grows and fades, relationships transform, and moments vanish the very instant they appear. To resist this truth is to live in a constant struggle with reality. To accept it is to be freed, freed from the fear of loss, freed from the endless obsession with control. The essence of suffering is not that things change, but that we expect, against all evidence, that they will not. This simple, radical acceptance reshapes the way we meet joy. When happiness arises and we clutch it, demanding it last forever, we poison the very sweetness we long to preserve. We cannot fully drink in a beautiful moment, because even as it unfolds, we are already grieving its end. But to embrace impermanence is to savor joy without change. A shared laugh, a golden sunset, the warmth of a gentle touch. They become infinitely more precious, not because they endure, but precisely because they will not. The awareness of impermanence transforms the ordinary into treasure. Gratitude flows like water through us, because nothing is assumed, nothing is taken for granted. And this same awareness transforms our relationship with pain. When suffering arrives, the mind often whispers, "This will never end," and despair becomes unbearable. But impermanence reminds us, no storm has lasted forever. No emotion, however sharp, however heavy, has remained unchanged. Even the fiercest grief softens in time. Even the deepest wound finds moments of rest. To accept this truth gives us patience, a strength that allows us to endure without collapsing. Pain remains real, but it no longer masquerades as eternal. Hopelessness dissolves in the light of change. Impermanence also reshapes how we love and how we relate. So often conflict is born of our demand that others stay fixed, unmoving, unchanging, that they remain who they once were, that they keep the same opinions, that they always fill the same role in our lives. But every person is in motion, just as we ourselves are in motion. To embrace impermanence is to honor this movement. It is to give others space to evolve, to grow, to outgrow, to become. Love then becomes freer, because it is no longer bound in chains of expectation. Loss becomes gentler, because we knew deep down that nothing could be held forever. Even the fear of death softens under the light of impermanence. What terrifies us is not death itself, but the illusion that death is unnatural, an interruption in an otherwise permanent story. Yet everything in life points toward this truth. What is born will one day pass. To resist this is to live in terror. To accept it is to rest in peace. Awareness of mortality is not meant to depress the heart, but to awaken it. It sharpens our attention to each breath, each connection, each chance to live this moment fully. Death is not the thief of meaning, but its greatest giver, for it reminds us that everything matters now. Impermanence also humbles both pride and despair. When success comes, ego clings as if it will define us forever. When failure comes, ego collapses as if it will bury us forever. Both are illusion. Success fades, failure fades. Life moves, endlessly unfolding beyond both. To know this is to walk in balance. We are not inflated by victory, nor destroyed by defeat. We meet both with equanimity, knowing each is only a passing guest. This balance is true freedom, a steady heart in the midst of endless change. The refusal to accept impermanence often hides as control. We tighten our grip on relationships, on possessions, on plans. We tell ourselves, if I hold tightly enough, nothing will slip away. But what we grip cuts us all the more deeply. When it changes, as it must, acceptance teaches a gentler way. To hold life as one would hold water in open palms. It may pass through, but in that openness, there is no struggle, there is only flow. This truth is not abstract. It is a practice, a way of seeing. We can begin by noticing the smallest shifts, watching the body breathe, observing how every inhalation must end, how every sensation arises and falls away. This is impermanence, revealed moment to moment. Even thoughts and emotions, when seen with clarity, display their fleeting nature. Anger, for instance, feels consuming, overwhelming. Yet if watched closely, it shifts, wavers, and dissolves. No wave of feeling has ever lasted unchanged. Through awareness, we begin to trust this truth. All things arise, all things pass. And in this trust, the mind and heart begin to rest. It rises, it swells, it peaks, and then it falls away. Every breath, every thought, every emotion follows this rhythm. Through practice, impermanence ceases to be a concept we discuss and becomes a reality we directly experience. Impermanence also carries within it the seed of forgiveness. Resentment survives only when we believe that a person is frozen in the role of the one who wronged us. But when we recognize that all beings are in motion, that even those who hurt us are changing moment by moment, we begin to loosen the heavy grip of grudges. This does not erase responsibility or excuse harm, but it opens a doorway to compassion. Just as we ourselves are not who we once were, so too are they no longer the same as before. To accept impermanence is to release the rigid image we project onto others, and in that release, a quiet peace begins to unfold. Impermanence is not only about letting go, it is also about finding courage. How many people postpone their deepest dreams, convinced there will always be more time? But impermanence whispers with clarity, time is never guaranteed. This realization does not make life heavy. It makes it urgent in the most sacred sense. It moves us to speak words of love while we still can, to walk the paths that matter while we have the strength, to savor the moments offered now, instead of deferring them to a future that may never arrive. Acceptance of impermanence is not a call to despair. It is a call to live fully, not someday but now. Even spiritual practice deepens when grounded in impermanence. Meditation ceases to be about achieving a permanent state, some final, unchanging arrival. Instead, it becomes the art of resting in the ever-changing flow of experience. Wisdom grows naturally, because wisdom is nothing more than seeing reality clearly. And reality itself is impermanent. The liberation offered by impermanence is not about abandoning life, but about entering into it more fully, with open hands and open eyes. When you truly know that everything passes, you stop wasting your strength trying to preserve or control it. You allow joy to be joy without clinging to its continuation. You allow grief to be grief without imagining it will annihilate you. You allow love to be love without demanding it remain unchanged. This is not freedom from change, but freedom through change. And in this freedom, a profound gratitude naturally arises. Every sunrise becomes a gift precisely because it will vanish. Every embrace becomes sacred because it will never happen again. In exactly the same way, every breath is precious because each one is one less in the arc of a single lifetime. Gratitude blooms from the deep knowing that nothing is owed and nothing is permanent. To accept impermanence is to finally step into alignment with the truth of existence. It does not mean joy and sorrow vanish. It means we cease resisting their flow. It does not mean love disappears. It means we cease demanding that love stay fixed. It does not mean we give up effort or vision. It means we release the illusion that outcomes will remain untouched by time. This is not resignation. It is liberation. For only when we stop fighting the river of change do we find the stillness that has always been present beneath its waters. And so the practice becomes simple, yet profound. Notice change, honor it, release the illusion of permanence, and rest in the spacious freedom that follows. In this freedom, life is not diminished. It is intensified, sharpened, luminous, fleeting, and endlessly precious. Every moment, every connection, every breath begins to shine more brightly, because we finally see how fragile, fleeting, and profoundly sacred it all is. And as the truth of impermanence settles deeper into the heart, a question rises like a tide, one that strikes at the very center of human longing. How do we love in a world where nothing lasts? If everything is subject to change, if people arrive and depart, if even the bonds we treasure most cannot be kept forever, how do we open ourselves to love without being shattered by loss? This is where the wisdom of non-attachment in relationships begins to reveal itself. Non-attachment does not mean withholding affection, nor does it mean keeping people at a distance. It is not coldness, nor detachment in the sense of indifference. It means loving fully, with depth and sincerity, while honoring the freedom and impermanence of the other. Attachment, by contrast, often masquerades as devotion. We convince ourselves that to cling tightly is to prove our love, that jealousy is a sign of care, that control is a form of protection. But these patterns do not grow from love, they grow from fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of inevitable change. The heart believes that if it grips hard enough, it can freeze love in place. Yet this grasping suffocates the very thing it longs to preserve. Non-attachment allows love to breathe. It is the open hand instead of the clenched fist, the willingness to cherish without owning, the courage to be present without demanding permanence. When love is knotted with possession, it becomes conditional. We begin to measure others by how well they meet our needs, by how closely they mirror our expectations. In doing so, the relationship ceases to be a meeting of two free beings and collapses into a contract of control. Non-attachment reveals another way. It says, I love you not because you fulfill my conditions, but because love itself flows freely here. I do not demand that you remain unchanged. I do not require that you exist solely for my satisfaction. I honor your freedom as much as my own. And in this honoring, love does not weaken, it deepens. This principle dismantles the illusion of ownership. We often speak of others as my partner, my friend, my spouse. Though convenient, these words conceal a subtle but dangerous assumption that another being can be possessed like an object. But no one belongs to us. No one can be owned. Each person is a living, breathing, evolving mystery. Non-attachment does not diminish closeness. It enriches it by removing the weight of possession. To say I love you with non-attachment is to say, I rejoice in your presence, but I do not own your being. Non-attachment also dissolves jealousy. Jealousy thrives on the belief that love is scarce, fragile, limited, that if someone else receives affection, there will be less left for us. But true love is not diminished by sharing. It expands endlessly like light. When we practice non-attachment, we see that the love we give and the love others receive are not in competition. This loosens the grip of insecurity and replaces it with trust. Trust, then, becomes less about the false guarantee of permanence and more about the freedom to choose one another, again and again, in the living present. At its heart, non-attachment is about presence itself. When we cling to permanence, we overlook the beauty unfolding before us. We gaze into the eyes of a loved one, but think instead of how to keep them forever. We share a moment of laughter, but are already worrying about its end. Non-attachment calls us back, reminding us to taste love fully as it is, without being haunted by what will one day change. And in this way, every gesture, every word, every touch becomes luminous, because we know it cannot be repeated in exactly the same form. Non-attachment does not weaken commitment. Many fear that to let go of possession is to abandon loyalty, but the opposite is true. When love is freed from chains, it becomes more resilient, more enduring, and more real. Commitment that is born from attachment is fragile, for it relies on conditions remaining fixed. It clings to sameness, to stability, to guarantees. But commitment that grows from non-attachment is steady, for it is rooted not in compulsion, but in freedom. To say, I am with you because I choose to be, not because I fear to be without you, is far more powerful than loyalty born of dependence. This shift also transforms how we navigate conflict. In attachment, conflict is often a battlefield of egos. We grasp at being right. We clutch at the upper hand. We tighten our grip on the story we want to control. But in non-attachment, the center of gravity moves. The priority shifts from domination to understanding. We no longer need to crush the other, because our identity is not chained to winning. This loosening creates space for listening, for humility, for compromise. Conflict does not disappear, but it softens, because love is no longer entangled with the need to conquer. Non-attachment also invites us to see those closest to us as mirrors. Every irritation, every longing, every fear they awaken in us is an invitation to look within. Instead of blaming them for not meeting our demands, we can pause and ask, what does this reaction reveal about my own attachments? In this way, relationships themselves become paths of awakening. Each friction is an opportunity to loosen the grip of ego. This is not about tolerating harm or excusing abuse, but about using the ordinary tensions of daily life as doorways into deeper awareness. Here, the acceptance of impermanence becomes vital. Every relationship will shift. Through growth, through distance, through death. To cling to permanence is to prepare our own heartbreak. But when we accept change, we love with greater courage. We stop wasting our energy, resisting the inevitable, and instead pour it into cherishing the fleeting time we have. This awareness transforms ordinary days into treasures, and ordinary words into blessings. The fragility of life makes love not weaker, but more urgent, more precious, more alive. Non-attachment also gives us grace when relationships end. Whether through separation, estrangement, or death, endings are woven into the fabric of existence. Attachment makes these endings devastating, insisting that what once was should have lasted forever. Non-attachment allows grief without bondage. We mourn sincerely, we honor what was shared, but we do not collapse under the illusion of permanence. This grace allows love to lead, without scarring us with bitterness. In family life, non-attachment takes on its own form. Parents who cling tightly to their children often mistake control for care. But true care does not imprison. It gives freedom to grow, to falter, to become. Non-attachment in parenting means loving fully, while letting go of ownership over a child's path. It is the strength to say, I will walk beside you, but I will not bind you with my expectations. This freedom allows love between parent and child to mature into respect rather than suffocation. Friendships, too, are nourished by this wisdom. Friends may drift apart, grow in different directions, or reconnect after many years. Attachment tries to freeze the bond, demanding constant closeness, constant proof. Non-attachment accepts the ebb and flow, trusting that true friendship is not measured by frequency, but by sincerity. This acceptance dissolves guilt and pressure, allowing friendships to breathe and to evolve naturally. Even romantic love, so often seen as the pinnacle of attachment, grows deeper and more radiant when it is held in the open hand of non-attachment, instead of a consuming passion that burns out in jealousy and control. Love becomes a steady, enduring flame, not frantic, not grasping, but nourished by freedom. You can adore someone without needing to own them. You can desire their presence without fearing their absence. You can care for them deeply without trying to govern their choices. Such love is not weaker for its openness. It is indestructible, precisely because it does not depend on possession. Non-attachment also reshapes how we hold ourselves. Many people treat their own being as if it were property, demanding perfection, forcing themselves into rigid self-images, clinging to fixed identities out of fear of change. But when we practice non-attachment toward ourselves, we breathe space into our own existence. We allow ourselves to grow, to stumble, to change, without judgment. This self-freedom ripples outward, strengthening every relationship we touch. For the less tightly we cling to who we believe we must be, the less desperately we need others to confirm it. Ultimately, non-attachment in relationships teaches us that love is not about holding on, but about letting it flow. It is not about security through control, but about trust through presence. It is not about permanence, but about depth in this living, breathing moment. Such love may not resemble the fairy tales of ownership, yet it carries a truth far more enduring. It is the love that remains even when circumstances shift, even when forms dissolve, because it is not bound by conditions. It is rooted in freedom. To love without possessing is to love with eyes wide open. It is to see the fragility of life and choose to pour yourself into it anyway. It is to know that nothing lasts forever, and yet to give yourself fully, without reservation, here and now. This is not a lesser love. It is a greater love, a love purified of fear, stripped of control. It is the love that heals, the love that liberates, the love that does not bind but sets free. And in this freedom, love touches its truest form. Yet even after discovering the freedom of loving without possession, there remains a truth we cannot escape. No matter how much wisdom we gather, no matter how carefully we loosen our grip, life still cuts us open. Loss still comes. Disappointment still arrives. The heart still aches. It is easy to embrace non-attachment when waters are calm and everything flows smoothly. But it is in the fires of suffering that the true depth of detachment is tested. Pain is not an obstacle on the path. It is often the very doorway into the heart of it. For many, suffering delivers the lessons that no book can teach, that no moment of stillness on a meditation cushion can reveal. Suffering itself instructs with unshakable clarity. It uncovers the hidden knots of clinging. A broken heart exposes the way. We tied our worth to another's presence. Financial loss reveals the fragility of the identity we built on stability and success. Illness exposes the illusion that the body is under our command. Without suffering, these attachments remain buried, comfortably tucked away in the patterns of routine. But when the ground is pulled out from under us, the chains rattle loudly. We hear what we have been gripping all along. This is why pain becomes such a profound teacher. It forces us to confront illusions we would rather continue avoiding. We do not want to admit that nothing lasts. We do not want to face that we cannot control others. We do not want to accept that even the body itself will one day betray us and fall away. Yet when suffering arrives, these truths stand before us with undeniable force. To resist them is to multiply the pain. To accept these truths is to begin the first step of awakening. It is often said in the Buddhist tradition that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is the raw texture of life. The sting of loss, the weight of illness, the ache of rejection, the slow burn of aging. Suffering, however, is what the mind weaves around this pain. The resistance, the refusal, the endless narrative of why me. And this should not be happening. Detachment begins the moment we learn to separate the two. Pain will come as surely as night follows day. But suffering does not need to rule us. By listening to pain instead of resenting it, we discover a doorway that opens directly into freedom. Take grief as an example. When someone we love dies, the pain is undeniable, sharp, and raw. But suffering often takes the form of protest. They should still be here. Life should have given us more time. Death should have waited. This resistance to impermanence tightens the wound, like pressing salt into an already open cut. And yet those who allow grief to move through them, who do not resist its tides, often emerge with a heart transformed. They discover a deeper appreciation for life, a gentler capacity to love, a quieter courage in the face of endings. The loss did not destroy them. It reshaped them. Suffering cracked the shell of attachment and revealed a horizon wider than what was seen before. Suffering also humbles the ego. When life flows smoothly, the ego thrives on illusions of control. We imagine ourselves as the architects of our fate, believing we can hold everything together by sheer effort. But suffering dismantles this illusion. It strips away the arrogance of self-sufficiency and reveals just how fragile, how dependent, how profoundly interconnected we truly are. And in that humility, compassion naturally blooms. Those who have walked through deep valleys of pain often carry within them the ability to sit with others in their darkness, without judgment or impatience. Their own wounds have softened the heart, making them tender where once they were guarded. This is one of pain's most surprising gifts. It teaches not only detachment, but compassion. Because once you yourself have been broken, you understand the fragility in everyone. Detachment through suffering is not about growing numb. It is about becoming more real. Those who have walked through fire do not waste themselves on smoke. Trivial irritations lose their grip. The small inconveniences that once consumed us seem laughably weightless compared to what has been endured. Suffering burns away what is unnecessary, leaving only what matters. In this way, pain grants us clarity, a clarity we may never have chosen, but one of the greatest gifts nonetheless. Another lesson suffering offers is the futility of resistance. So much pain is magnified not by its own weight, but by the way we fight it, deny it, push it away with clenched fists. And yet the more we resist, the stronger it grows. Eventually, exhaustion breaks us open, and we are left with no choice but to release. This surrender is not weakness. It is the wisdom of yielding. In the moment we stop clinging, even in the midst of anguish, a small space of peace opens up. It does not erase the hardship, but it changes how we carry it. Suffering also embodies the truth of impermanence in a way nothing else can. We may nod our heads to the teaching of change, accept it intellectually, but when life takes away someone or something we love, impermanence is no longer a concept. It is carved into our bones. Once this truth is lived in the marrow, we can no longer walk through life pretending things will stay the same. We begin to cherish more deeply, to love more honestly, to loosen our grip more willingly. The pain of loss becomes a ruthless, yet loving teacher, urging us not to waste our days clinging to illusions. And in the realm of spiritual practice, suffering so often becomes the catalyst for transformation. Few people step onto the path of awakening from a place of comfort alone. It is suffering that propels them forward, that cracks open the hidden longing for truth. Illness, heartbreak, failure. These become the unasked for but undeniable gateways to a deeper search for meaning. They are thresholds we would never choose, yet they open into the very freedom we seek. Without suffering, many would remain asleep in the routines of comfort. It is often the shock of loss, the collapse of certainty, the sting of failure, that shakes us from the illusion that life can be neatly controlled. This shock is undeniably painful, but within its pain lies a sacred invitation. Yet not all who suffer awaken. Some grow bitter, some harden into resentment. Some build walls around their hearts to keep the world out. What makes the difference is not the pain itself, but how we meet it. When we resist suffering, when we cling to the idea that life owes us immunity, pain curdles into poison. But when we approach suffering as messenger rather than enemy, it becomes teacher, shaping us into something freer, humbler, and more awake. This is why the Buddha placed suffering at the very beginning of the Four Noble Truths. He did not deny it, nor did he glorify it. He pointed to it with clear eyes and said, "This is the starting point of freedom." Without suffering, detachment remains a lofty theory. With suffering, detachment becomes a necessity. Suffering also awakens gratitude in ways comfort never could. When you have known loss, even the smallest joys take on new radiance. A simple meal becomes a feast. A kind word feels like balm. A quiet moment of stillness becomes a sanctuary. This gratitude is not forced nor sentimental. It is born from knowing the opposite, from walking through the desert and finally tasting water. Pain deepens our capacity to cherish, teaching us not to take for granted what we have. because we know in our bones how fragile it truly is. Pain also sharpens our presence. When wounds open, the past is heavy with regret, and the future weighed down with fear. The only ground left to stand on is the immediacy of now. Though uncomfortable, this forced return to the present reveals the truth the mind so often evades. Life can only be lived in this moment. Suffering pushes us back to presence, and in presence, the seeds of detachment begin to quietly take root. In relationships, suffering has its own piercing lessons. Heartbreak reveals how much of what we once called love was tangled with possession. Betrayal exposes how much we projected illusions onto others. Loss confronts us with how fiercely we demanded permanence. Though these experiences cut deeply, they strip away false notions of love and create the possibility of a love that breathes freely. A love that is less about control and more about genuine care. Through pain, love can be reborn unchanged. Even the body becomes a teacher in this way. Illness, aging, and injury remind us that youth cannot be clung to. Strength cannot be preserved, and even health is not guaranteed. These are not punishments, but awakenings in disguise. They bring us face to face with impermanence, a truth we often avoid while things seem steady. Yet in confronting the body's fragility, a wisdom is revealed that no comfort could ever give. So suffering, far from being only an obstacle, is often the most powerful gateway into detachment. It shatters illusions, humbles the ego, deepens compassion, heightens gratitude, and sharpens presence. It strips away what is false so that we can glimpse what is real. This does not mean we should seek suffering. Life will provide enough of it without our invitation. But when it comes, to meet it with openness rather than resistance is to let it shape us into greater freedom. To suffer is to be human. To learn from suffering is to awaken. When we allow pain to be our teacher, the chains of attachment loosen. We stop demanding permanence from what cannot last. We stop fighting truths that no force of will can undo. We stop shrinking from life's fragility and instead bow to it with open eyes and open hands. In this way, pain becomes not only something to endure, but a sacred guide, leading us into the freedom that comfort alone could never reveal. And after walking with the lessons of suffering, the path opens into something eminently practical, something that touches every corner of daily life. For suffering shows us the heavy cost of clinging, but it leaves us with an urgent question. How then shall we live without that constant grasping? How shall we work, love, create, and care for what we have, without becoming imprisoned by possession? In Buddhist practice, this living answer is called non-grasping. And it is not about rejecting life, but about learning the art of holding it lightly, engaging fully while refusing to be chained by what inevitably slips away. Non-grasping is not indifference or apathy. It does not ask you to walk through the world with empty hands, renouncing all connection, responsibility, or joy. Rather, it is the gentle skill of touching everything deeply, without letting it stick to you. A person who practices non-grasping can work with passion, love with sincerity, and enjoy possessions with ease. Yet they are not enslaved by any of these. The difference is in the grip. Grasping says, "This must be mine, this must remain. Without it, I am nothing." Non-grasping whispers, "This is here now, I will honor it, and when it changes, as all things must, I will release it." This principle reshapes how we approach our work. So often, identity and worth are tied to achievements. Success becomes a possession, something we cling to as proof of who we are. Failure feels unbearable, as though it erases our very being. But non-grasping allows us to engage wholeheartedly in effort while loosening the chains of outcome. You still give your best, but you no longer imprison yourself in the results. The act of doing becomes its own reward. Energy once wasted on fear of failure or endless comparison is freed, and burnout dissolves because your worth is no longer at stake. In relationships, non-grasping brings a deep steadiness. Grasping seeks to freeze people, to bind them into roles that fit our needs or expectations. But no one can be held still. Life is motion. Non-grasping honors this truth. It allows us to love without control, to support without suffocation, to walk beside another without chaining them to us. And when relationships shift or even end, the heart still aches, but the pain is not magnified by the illusion that they were ever ours to keep. Possessions, too, reveal the practice of non-grasping. The world whispers constantly that happiness lies in more wealth, more security, more things to display. But the tighter we clutch, the heavier life becomes. Non-grasping does not demand rejection of possessions. It transforms our relationship to them. You may own a home without being owned by it, enjoy wealth without trembling at its loss, use tools and technology without being enslaved by the hunger for the newest and best. Life becomes lighter, possessions become resources rather than chains, and freedom expands quietly within the ordinary. Non-grasping also changes the way we meet change itself. Grasping clings to what is past, replaying old memories, or reaches desperately into the future, demanding certainty. But non-grasping accepts that life flows forward. It says yes to change, not because change is painless, but because it is real. This acceptance grants resilience. Instead of breaking under the storms of life, we bend like bamboo in the wind. And in that flexibility, we discover a strength far greater than rigidity. In daily practice, non-grasping can be cultivated through mindfulness. By observing thoughts and emotions without seizing them, the mind learns to release. Anger arises, we notice it, but do not collapse into "I am anger." Joy arises, we savor it, but do not cling to it, demanding it last forever. In this rhythm of holding and letting go, life shifts from being a battlefield of control to a dance of presence. The beauty of non-grasping is that it amplifies gratitude. When you know you cannot hold anything forever, you cherish it more deeply. A meal, a conversation, a moment of silence, all shine brighter when you no longer demand their permanence. You savor them fully while they are here, instead of lamenting when they pass. Gratitude flowers naturally in this soil, and ordinary moments reveal themselves as extraordinary gifts, not because they endure, but because you are awake to them while they are alive. And perhaps most profoundly, non-grasping begins to heal our relationship with ourselves. Many people cling to rigid self-images. I must always be strong. I cannot make mistakes. I must be successful. These inner graspings create tension and conflict because life inevitably contradicts them. No one can remain unbroken, flawless, or endlessly triumphant. By practicing non-grasping, we give ourselves permission to change, to evolve, to stumble, and to rise again. We loosen the grip on outdated versions of ourselves and begin to honor the living process of becoming. This freedom of self removes the exhausting weight of constant performance and allows genuine growth to unfold naturally. There is also a quiet courage hidden within non-grasping. Grasping clings because it fears the vastness of emptiness. It whispers that without possessions, without roles, without certainty, there will be nothing left of us. But non-grasping reveals the opposite. Release does not leave us hollow, it leaves us spacious. It opens us to new experiences, new perspectives, and new forms of love. What the ego interprets as loss, the heart discovers as liberation. Even the smallest practices in daily life can water this wisdom. Notice how often you grasp for control in conversations, waiting for your turn to speak instead of listening deeply. Notice how often you grasp at fleeting pleasures, stretching them beyond their natural rhythm. Notice how often you grasp at plans, demanding that life obey your script. Each moment of noticing becomes an invitation to release, to soften, to practice the open hand instead of the closed fist. Non-grasping also invites us into the path of service. When we give without clutching at recognition, our actions carry a rare purity. When we help without seeking repayment, compassion flows freely. Service becomes light instead of heavy because it is no longer chained to expectations. This kind of giving nourishes both giver and receiver, creating ripples of kindness unbound by contracts of ownership. In times of uncertainty, the wisdom of non-grasping becomes even more vital. The grasping mind panics when the future is unclear, scrambling to predict, control, and secure. But non-grasping does not erase uncertainty. It teaches us how to rest within it. It allows us to act where we can and to release where we cannot. This practice births a calm strength, the courage to stand in the unknown without collapsing under its weight. Non-grasping is not the absence of love, work, or joy. It is the presence of them all, freed from the chains of possession. It is the courage to engage fully without demanding permanence. It is the wisdom to let life flow through your hands without trying to trap it. And in this flow, life itself becomes lighter, clearer, freer. When embodied, non-grasping transforms daily living into spiritual practice. Work shifts from self-obsession to service. Relationships soften into companionship rather than ownership. Possessions become useful tools rather than binding chains. Even the self ceases to be fixed and rigid, revealing itself instead as fluid, dynamic, alive. And in all of this, freedom arises. Not freedom from life, but freedom within it. This freedom is not abstract or distant. It is felt in the looseness of the heart, in the ease of breath, in the quiet joy that arrives when you stop clinging to what was never yours to hold forever. It is the taste of release in the very midst of activity. It is the peace of knowing you can love fully, work wholeheartedly, and still remain free. Non-grasping does not take you away from life. It hands life back to you, unburdened, spacious, vibrant. And once the grip has been loosened through this practice, another truth begins to rise to the surface. It challenges how we approach effort itself. For we are often taught to believe that the harder we push, the faster life will reward us. The more we strain, the sooner everything will fall into place. Yet again and again, reality reveals a paradox. Sometimes the harder we chase, the further the outcome drifts. Sometimes the tighter we grasp, the more fiercely life resists. And in contrast, when we approach life with calm focus, when effort flows without desperation, doors begin to open that struggle alone could never unlock. This is the paradox of effort, one of the most delicate and subtle lessons in detachment. It teaches us that pushing too hard can actually block the very results we long for. The quality of the energy behind effort matters just as much, if not more, than the effort itself. Desperation carries the vibration of lack. It shouts to the world, "I do not yet have what I want, and I cannot rest until I do." That energy clings, grasps, and in its very grasping repels. Calm effort, on the other hand, carries the energy of trust. It whispers, "I will give my best, but I will not be enslaved by the outcome." This relaxed clarity attracts alignment because it flows with life rather than against it. On the surface, both forms of effort may look nearly identical. Long hours, persistence, dedication. Yet beneath the surface, one is driven by fear while the other is guided by freedom. This paradox is most visible in relationships. Think of the times when someone pursued another with overwhelming intensity. The constant demand for reassurance, the desperate clinging, the unspoken pressure to reciprocate, it rarely brings closeness. Instead, it creates distance. Love breathes in space, not suffocation. Calm presence invites intimacy, while desperation quietly drives it away. Same truth plays out in work, in creativity, even in spiritual practice. When we grasp too tightly, we choke the flow. When we loosen our grip, things unfold more naturally. The Buddha's teaching of the middle way points directly here. Too much effort burns out the mind and body like strings pulled too tight on a lute that snap under strain. Too little effort leaves us stagnant like strings too loose to make music. Balance is the art. Effort that is steady, mindful, and relaxed creates growth. Effort that is frantic or careless breeds suffering. The paradox is that discipline is necessary, yet obsession is destructive. The skill lies in applying yourself wholeheartedly while refusing to chain your peace to results. In everyday life, we often confuse busyness with effectiveness. Grasping effort fills our days with endless tasks, as though constant movement itself guarantees progress. But such effort often scatters energy, producing stress rather than meaningful results. Calm effort, by contrast, is precise. It knows when to act, when to pause, when to step back. This clarity is not born from laziness, but from working without panic, from trusting the rhythm of action and rest. Non-grasping transforms effort into skillful action. Psychology echoes this truth. Research on performance shows how overthinking and pressure degrade ability. Athletes who strain too hard tense their muscles and lose fluidity. Artists who obsess over perfection paralyze their creativity. Students who panic about grades block their memory recall in the very moment they most need it. Desperate effort sabotages the very outcome it craves. Detachment, however, keeps effort fluid, playful, and alive. Calm effort harmonizes body and mind, creating conditions for excellence without being burdened by fear. This principle is mirrored in meditation itself. Beginners often sit with the idea that they must force the mind into silence. They strain, resist thoughts, and battle restlessness. The more they push, the louder the mind becomes. Progress feels impossible. But when they learn to sit with ease, allowing thoughts to rise and dissolve without clinging, silence arrives naturally. Effort without desperation invites peace. Effort with desperation blocks it. And beneath all of this lies another layer of truth. Desperate effort often hides attachment to identity. We push too hard because beneath the surface, we are not only chasing results, we are chasing an image of ourselves. The grasping is rarely just for the achievement itself, but for the identity it promises. Once I succeed, I will be enough. Once I reach this, I will finally prove my worth. This is the ego's disguise, the subtle demand that effort must validate our existence. But detachment dissolves this illusion. It allows us to act for the sake of the action itself, not for the self-image it claims to secure. When effort becomes pure expression rather than a grasping for validation, it becomes lighter, freer, and ironically, far more effective. Calm effort nurtures another quality often lost in desperation: patience. Desperation shouts, "I must have this now." It demands instant results, and when they do not arrive, it collapses into frustration or despair. Calm effort, however, trusts timing. It understands that seeds sprout in their season, that certain doors open only when conditions align. This patience is not passive waiting. It is active perseverance without panic. It allows us to keep working steadily, without being crushed by the weight of unmet expectation. For this reason, calm effort almost always outlasts desperate effort. It is sustainable because it does not burn out the spirit in its hunger for immediacy. The paradox also reveals itself in our relationship with possessions. The more we cling to wealth or status with desperate energy, the more they slip from our hands. We spend recklessly to prove abundance, or we hoard in fear of loss, both extremes breeding imbalance. Calm effort in managing possessions, however, brings stability. It becomes a steady rhythm of earning, saving, giving, and enjoying without obsession. Wealth handled with calm effort supports life. Wealth clutched with desperation enslaves it. This wisdom reshapes the way we approach goals as well. Ambition driven by desperation often feels like chasing a mirage. No matter how much progress is made, the destination seems always just beyond reach because happiness has been tied to arrival. Calm effort, however, restores meaning to the journey. Each step carries value, not only the finish line. This shift dissolves the restless hunger that blocks fulfillment. Goals remain, but they no longer enslave us. There is a quiet confidence woven into calm effort. Desperation insists, "If I do not force this, it will never happen." Calm effort responds, "I will do my part, and I trust that life will respond in its own way." This trust is not naive optimism. It is rooted in wisdom. We control our actions, not the entire web of conditions that shape results. When we release the illusion of total control, we stop scattering our energy in battles against the inevitable. We redirect strength to what we can truly influence. This is why calm effort holds such power. It focuses our energy into the present moment instead of leaking it into fear of outcomes. Even in failure, the paradox remains luminous. Desperate effort views failure as devastation, as the collapse of identity because the desired outcome slipped through the grasp. Calm effort, by contrast, sees failure as feedback, a step on the path rather than the end of it. This perspective opens the way to resilience. Instead of collapsing into despair, we adjust, learn, and continue walking. Failure becomes teacher rather than enemy. Such transformation is only possible when effort has been freed from desperation. The same paradox reveals itself in creativity. Some of the most profound breakthroughs arise not from relentless forcing, but from the art of letting go. Writers often speak of inspiration arriving only after they stop staring at the blank page in frustration. Scientists remind us that some of the most transformative insights do not appear in the lab, after sleepless nights of grinding, but in moments of rest, during a walk, a shower, or a quiet pause when the mind has softened its grip. Musicians speak of finding flow not when they obsess over the perfect note, but when they finally surrender to the music itself and simply play. Calm effort creates the spaciousness in which inspiration can enter. When the mind is no longer cluttered with urgency, it becomes open enough to receive what cannot be forced. This is why the paradox of effort is not about doing less, but about doing differently. It does not glorify laziness, nor does it celebrate indifference. Instead, it calls us into balance. It invites us to work with presence rather than panic, to act with clarity rather than desperation. In this balanced state, outcomes often improve because action is more precise and energy is not wasted in fear. Yet the deeper gift lies not in better outcomes but in inner steadiness. Peace remains untouched, regardless of whether the result meets expectation. This is detachment applied directly to effort, to move fully, yet remain free. From here, the lesson becomes luminous. Trying too hard, when fueled by grasping and fear, creates resistance and pushes life further from us. Calm effort, rooted in trust, does the opposite. It invites life closer. To live in this way is to embody the middle way, not withdrawing from action, but refusing to be crushed by the hunger for results. Here lies a profound freedom. The freedom to act wholeheartedly while remaining unbound. The freedom to strive without being enslaved by striving. The freedom to let life unfold without fear of how it must look. And once we recognize how effort itself can either open doors or close them depending on the spirit behind it, another natural question arises. How do we carry this wisdom into our relationship with wealth? For among all attachments, money and material comfort are some of the strongest threads binding the human heart. We chase them desperately, fearing scarcity, or we reject them altogether, fearing corruption. Yet both extremes lead to imbalance. The path of detachment does not require poverty, nor does it glorify greed. It points to something far more subtle, to live with abundance without being bound by it. To walk the middle path where wealth serves life rather than enslaves it. Wealth in itself is neutral. It is neither pure nor poisonous. Like all tools, its value depends on the hands that hold it. A knife can prepare a nourishing meal or cause harm. Fire can warm a home or burn it down. Money can open opportunities or deepen chains. The real problem lies not in wealth's presence, but in our clinging to it, in the illusion that our worth and our safety depend entirely on what we possess. Detachment reveals another form of prosperity, one measured not by the size of possessions, but by the freedom with which they are held. True abundance is the ability to enjoy what we have without fear and to release it without despair. When clinging dominates, wealth turns into a cage. Fear of losing it breeds anxiety. Obsession with multiplying it breeds greed. Comparison erodes gratitude. Many live as prisoners of abundance, restless even while surrounded by more than enough. Detachment dissolves these invisible chains. It shifts the focus from how much do I own to how lightly can I hold what I have. This single shift transforms wealth from burden into blessing. The middle path asks us to cultivate resources with awareness, to share them with wisdom, and to enjoy them without obsession. On one side lies attachment, the endless hunger for more, where no amount can ever feel enough. On the other side lies aversion, the rejection of wealth as inherently corrupt, which often hides its own subtle pride, the pride of poverty, the identity of renunciation. Both distortions are rooted in ego. Detachment walks between them. It sees wealth neither as savior nor as enemy, but simply as resource, a means to support life and practice. From this perspective, success itself is redefined, for the world often equates prosperity with luxury, accumulation, and display. But from the view of detachment, prosperity is not measured by how much you own, but by how free you are in relation to what you own. A person of modest means who sleeps without fear of loss may be far richer than the millionaire who lies awake chained to anxiety. Abundance without detachment is fragile, for it is always at risk of collapse. Detachment, however, transforms even simple resources into wealth because it shifts the weight from possession to peace. Work and wealth are deeply woven together, and here too detachment brings balance. Many people trade away health, relationships, and even their peace of mind in pursuit of financial success, believing that rest and joy will finally come once they reach a certain level of income. Yet the finish line always moves because grasping has no end. Detachment breaks this exhausting cycle. It teaches us to align work with values, not only with profit. Wealth earned with integrity and balance nourishes life. Wealth earned at the cost of inner peace corrodes it from within. This middle way also reshapes generosity. When clinging rules, giving feels like loss, a subtraction from security, a dent in what protects us. But with detachment, giving becomes natural because wealth is no longer a fixed possession to guard, but a flowing current to share. What you release returns in forms you cannot predict. Sometimes in material ways, but often in subtler treasures: joy, connection, freedom, trust. Generosity born from detachment is not obligation, not guilt, not performance. It is freedom expressing itself through the act of release. At the same time, detachment guards against carelessness. To hold wealth lightly does not mean to waste it. Wisdom and responsibility remain essential. The middle path is not reckless giving nor anxious hoarding. It is balance. It is knowing when to save, when to spend, when to share, and when to let go. This balance protects us from both greed and neglect. Wealth also tests our attachment to identity. Many people define themselves by what they own: the car, the house, the wardrobe, the title. When these outer signs are threatened or lost, their sense of self collapses with them. Detachment severs this fragile link. It allows identity to rest not on possessions but on values, character, and presence. From this ground, stability arises because external things will always change, but inner integrity does not vanish with a market shift. When identity is no longer chained to wealth, true confidence grows, confidence that cannot be repossessed. The middle path to prosperity also teaches contentment. Contentment is not resignation, not stagnation, but a deep recognition that enough already exists here and now. Without contentment, no amount of wealth ever satisfies because craving always whispers for more. With contentment, even the simplest comforts feel abundant. This does not mean abandoning ambition or refusing growth. It means pursuing them without the poison of restlessness. In this way, prosperity is not postponed for some future milestone. It is tasted in every stage of the journey. Detachment also widens the very definition of wealth. Wealth is not only material. Relationships, health, knowledge, time, peace of mind. These too are forms of treasure. A person who clings only to money while neglecting these other riches may live in poverty of spirit. A person who cultivates balance among them lives abundantly, even with modest financial means. This broader vision protects us from the illusion that life can be reduced to numbers on a screen. Much of grasping arises not from love of wealth but from fear of scarcity. Many cling to possessions not out of joy, but out of dread of losing safety. Detachment dissolves this fear because it rests on the truth of impermanence. Everything changes, everything passes. Security built only on what can vanish will always feel fragile. But when we accept impermanence, we stop clutching, and in that release we find a deeper security, the kind that does not depend on holding but on flowing with change. Nothing in life can ever be fully secured. Not health, not possessions, not reputation, not even the love of those dearest to us. But freedom dawns when we realize that peace does not depend on guarantees. Detachment replaces the illusion of control with resilience, the quiet strength to bend without breaking, to adapt no matter what arrives. This resilience is the truest security, one that wealth alone can never provide. To live this wisdom means asking new questions about money and resources. Instead of, how can I get more? Ask, how can I use what I already have well? Instead of, how can I protect everything from loss? Ask, how can I live freely with what I hold? Instead of, how can I surpass others? Ask, how can my resources serve what truly matters? These shifts do not reduce prosperity. They refine it. They align wealth with clarity rather than craving, with purpose rather than fear. Even in times of abundance, detachment keeps us steady. It prevents the pride that whispers, I am better because I have more. And in times of loss, detachment shields us from despair, the illusion that our worth was tied only to what we own. With equanimity, we move through both financial peaks and valleys with dignity. Prosperity, then, is not endless increase but steady freedom, the capacity to remain whole regardless of the market's rise and fall. The middle path of wealth also reshapes our relationship with desire. Desires will always appear, but detachment pauses to ask, is this a genuine need, or is it the ego chasing display? This inquiry filters illusion from necessity and directs our resources toward what truly sustains life. Money is no longer squandered on restless craving. Instead, it becomes aligned with clarity, a current flowing toward what nourishes rather than what distracts. Ultimately, the middle path to prosperity teaches us that wealth is best held as servant, never as master. Guided by detachment, it can support freedom, health, learning, creativity, compassion. But when clung to as the source of identity, it enslaves. Detachment transforms wealth from trap into tool, from burden into blessing. Prosperity is not denied but purified. Abundance without addiction, comfort without dependence, generosity without fear, enjoyment without obsession. This is the freedom of the middle way, where wealth is welcomed but not worshipped, used wisely but never clung to. In this balance, prosperity ceases to be just a matter of possessions. It becomes a state of liberation, a richness of being that no loss can take away. And yet, once we learn to hold wealth lightly, another weight reveals itself. One no coin can lift, one prosperity cannot solve. It is the heaviness of resentment, the old wounds carried for years, the chains of anger that keep the heart from resting. We speak often of forgiveness, but few truly know how to arrive there. For we mistake forgiveness for receiving apologies or watching justice prevail. Yet real forgiveness begins not with what others offer us, but with what we are willing to release. Detachment is the bridge. Without it, forgiveness feels impossible. With it, the heart learns how to breathe again. To forgive while clinging to the demand for an apology is like waiting for rain in a desert. It may never come, and in the waiting, you remain thirsty. The truth is that many who have harmed us will never acknowledge the pain. Some cannot, some will not, and some are no longer even here to speak the words we long to hear. If forgiveness depends on the actions of others, we remain imprisoned. Detachment dissolves this illusion. It teaches us to release the need for validation from those who harmed us. Forgiveness becomes a gift we grant ourselves, not a favor we wait to receive. The same truth applies to justice. The heart naturally longs for balance, for wrongs to be corrected, for wounds to be acknowledged, for life to restore harmony. Yet reality does not always conform to our sense of fairness. Some people escape accountability. Some wounds remain open, never repaired in the way we imagine. Clinging to this demand for perfect justice only deepens suffering. Detachment does not dismiss the importance of justice. It simply removes the illusion that our peace must be postponed until justice is delivered. Justice may arrive or it may never appear, but freedom is too precious to wait for external conditions. Forgiveness, rooted in detachment, releases the weight of waiting. It chooses liberation over endless suspension. This release is not weakness. Many resist forgiveness because they fear it excuses harm or invites more of it. Yet detachment clarifies the truth. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting, nor does it mean allowing harm to continue. It is not an endorsement of injustice, but a refusal to let injustice dictate the rest of our lives. Detachment gives us the strength to say, "This happened, it hurt, and I will not carry its poison any longer." In this way, forgiveness becomes an act of power, not surrender. Forgiveness without detachment is often fragile. We say the words, but the heart still clings to the wound. We release with one hand while tightening our grip with the other. Detachment makes forgiveness real because it dissolves the hidden expectations. It allows us to let go without conditions. And in that release, space opens. Space for peace, for healing, for new life to take root where bitterness once ruled. The heart that refuses forgiveness is a heart that lives under constant tension. Anger and resentment must be rehearsed, fed, kept alive through endless replay of memory. This drains energy, clouds joy, and burdens every relationship. Detachment breaks this cycle. It does not erase the wound, but it prevents us from endlessly nourishing it. Forgiveness becomes possible because we stop demanding that the past be rewritten. In that acceptance, the grip of resentment softens. This does not unfold overnight. Forgiveness through detachment often comes in layers. At first, the heart may resist fiercely, crying out that letting go betrays your own pain. But over time, detachment reveals the deeper truth, that holding on is the real betrayal, the betrayal of your own freedom. Slowly, the heart learns that forgiveness is not the denial of the wound, but the refusal to be ruled by it. The scar may remain, but the chains fall away. In relationships, forgiveness through detachment allows for genuine healing. When you demand an apology before you forgive, forgiveness becomes a negotiation, a transaction. But when you release that demand, forgiveness becomes unconditional. It does not always mean reconciliation. Sometimes distance remains the wiser choice, but it clears the field of bitterness. From this clarity, you can decide whether to rebuild the relationship or to let it go without hatred. Detachment ensures the choice is guided by wisdom, rather than by the fog of unresolved anger. Inwardly, forgiveness through detachment also transforms the way we treat ourselves. Many carry heavy resentment toward themselves, for mistakes, choices, or failures long past. They replay these memories endlessly, unable to forgive themselves because they cling to the belief that they should have been different, wiser, stronger. Detachment here means loosening the illusion of a fixed and flawless self. It is the recognition that in each moment, you acted with the understanding, capacity, and awareness available to you at that time. Self-forgiveness blooms when you let go of the demand for perfection and open instead to the reality of growth. This may be the hardest forgiveness of all, for the harshest judge often lives within, yet it is also the most liberating. Detachment deepens compassion as well. When we stop clinging to the image of others as permanent villains, a new perspective emerges. We begin to see their humanity. We may not excuse their actions, nor deny accountability, but we recognize that harm is often born of ignorance, fear, or unhealed pain. This shift does not erase responsibility. It widens understanding. Forgiveness flows more easily when we no longer demand that people be more than they were capable of being at the time. Compassion is not approval. It is simply a doorway to release. Forgiveness through detachment also breaks cycles of harm. Resentment, when held tightly, leaks outward. We project it, passing our wounds onto others, repeating the same patterns we once suffered. Detachment interrupts this repetition. By refusing the need for revenge, we stop the ripple of pain. The cycle ends with us. In this way, forgiveness is not merely personal. It is a quiet but profound gift to the world. On a spiritual level, forgiveness through detachment aligns us with impermanence itself. The people who wounded us, the pain they caused, even the emotions that once seemed unbearable, none of these are permanent. Clinging to resentment is, in truth, an attempt to fossilize the past, to hold it in place as though it could remain unchanged. But when we release, we align with reality. The past is already gone. We are free to live the present without carrying its shadow. This alignment brings peace of a deeper kind. We stop demanding that life become something it can never be, unchanging. Forgiveness through detachment does not mean the memory vanishes. The past remains, but our relationship to it changes. We remember without chains, without the sting of obsession. The memory becomes information, no longer torment, wisdom, rather than punishment. This transformation becomes possible only when we relinquish the demand for repayment. And so the role of detachment in forgiveness is not peripheral, it is central. Without detachment, forgiveness remains an idea, a word repeated but never fully lived. With detachment, forgiveness becomes reality, a freedom that no apology, no verdict, no restitution could ever guarantee. The heart no longer waits for others to make things right. It discovers its own release, its own peace, its own liberation. And in this release, forgiveness ceases to feel like a moral duty and becomes instead a natural expression of freedom itself. And once we glimpse how detachment frees the heart through forgiveness, another question arises, one that shapes the very way we move through life. What does it mean to act with full presence yet without clinging to results? Many confuse detachment with indifference, believing it means giving less effort, holding back, or caring halfway. But the truth is the opposite. Detachment is not about caring less. It is about caring more deeply for the process while releasing the chains of outcome. This distinction is subtle yet transformative. Detachment from outcome is not the same as detachment from process. To misunderstand this is to risk falling into passivity. To understand it is to unlock a way of living where every step has meaning, even if the destination never comes. When we cling to outcomes, our energy narrows into obsession. Every moment is measured against the yardstick of progress. We ask, how close am I to the goal? What reward awaits me at the end? And in that constant measuring, we miss the richness of the path itself. A student studies only for grades, not for the joy of learning. An artist creates only for applause, not for the freedom of expression. A worker labors only for promotion, not for the dignity of excellence. When the outcome is delayed or denied, despair enters, and suddenly the entire process feels wasted. Detachment dissolves this illusion. It whispers, the process matters in itself. The outcome is uncertain, but the effort is real, alive, and transformative. This does not mean goals are meaningless. Destinations give us direction, like stars guiding the traveler at night. Many approach meditation or prayer with the goal of enlightenment, peace, or mystical experiences. The attachment to outcome creates tension, expectation, and often frustration. Thoughts of, am I progressing enough? Am I reaching the goal? Pull attention away from the very practice meant to cultivate presence. Detachment from outcomes frees the practitioner to immerse fully in each moment of sitting, each breath, each posture, each repetition of mantra or movement. The practice itself becomes complete, not a means to an end. The fruits, insights, calm, clarity may appear naturally, but they are no longer demanded. This principle extends to every area of life. Detachment does not remove ambition, creativity, or effort. It transforms them. Ambition becomes aligned with purpose rather than panic. Creativity flows freely rather than being enslaved to validation. Effort is applied with energy, focus, and commitment, yet without the constriction of desperate expectation. This is the paradox of detachment. By releasing obsession over results, we often achieve more, because energy is not wasted in anxiety, fear, or grasping. The path of detachment asks for full engagement, not withdrawal. It is not laziness disguised as wisdom. The artist must still pick up the brush. The worker must still perform their tasks with care. The parent must still nurture. The seeker must still meditate. But the difference is in the heart. Effort is no longer a lever to control life. It is an expression of alignment with it. You act because the step before you deserves your attention, not because the future demands it. The Buddha taught right effort, effort free from craving and aversion. This is not half-hearted work. It is wholehearted action guided by insight. Detachment from outcome strengthens discipline rather than weakening it. When the fear of failure is absent, persistence becomes sustainable. Failure itself is transformed. A runner may not win the race, yet the training builds stamina, clarity, and strength. A writer may not receive accolades, yet each word written refines their voice and vision. Nothing is wasted when the process is honored. Detachment reshapes our understanding of success. Outcome-driven success inflates the ego and ties self-worth to results. Process-driven success humbles, showing that the journey itself was the teacher. Achievements are appreciated, not possessed. They are milestones in growth rather than chains of identity. This clarity protects against pride, entitlement, and the illusion that external markers define our value. Relationships, too, are transformed. Many approach love and friendship with unspoken contracts. I will give if I receive. I will care if I am cared for. I will forgive if they change. When these conditions fail, bitterness grows. But when love is rooted in the process, the act of giving, nurturing, and being present, the bonds deepen. Love is not transactional, it flows naturally. The outcome, whether returned or not, no longer dictates the value of our care. Detachment allows love to be full, authentic, and free from chains, while still discerning harm and maintaining boundaries. Work is illuminated by the same principle. Outcome attachment leads to burnout, stress, and depletion. But when workers commit to the process, solving problems, serving, learning, improving, the satisfaction emerges in the engagement itself. Recognition may lag, promotions may not come, yet fulfillment is present in every step. Work becomes sustainable, nourishing rather than consuming. Creativity demonstrates this principle with particular clarity. The artist chasing applause may never be satisfied, for applause fades. The writer who seeks fame may collapse under rejection, but the creator who immerses fully in the process finds joy in expression itself. The act of creation becomes the reward. Paradoxically, such work often resonates more deeply with others, because authenticity carries its own magnetism, far more than desperation ever could. Spiritual practice, too, thrives in this balance. Meditation, prayer, chanting, or ritual pursued with detachment transforms from a tool to a living practice. The goal is not forced attainment, but attentive presence. Calm engagement allows insights, peace, and transformation to arrive naturally, without grasping or compulsion. In this way, detachment is not escape from life or effort. It is full immersion without the suffering of clinging. When results fail to appear as swiftly as we expect, disappointment and restlessness often arise. Yet authentic practice has never been about quick outcomes. It is about the rhythm of returning, of sitting with the breath, of gently guiding the mind back into awareness. If enlightenment arrives, it is not the prize to chase but a natural side effect, an echo of sincere devotion. The real treasure lies in the practice itself. The path is the process. By loosening our grip on results and ceasing to demand a timeline, our spiritual practice steadies itself and becomes something that can be sustained through all seasons of life. This release of outcome also nourishes patience, a patience born not of passivity but of trust. When we cling to results, urgency overtakes us. I must succeed now. I must achieve quickly. This demand for speed breeds agitation and tension. But when our roots are in the process, the tyranny of time dissolves. Growth may require years or even a lifetime, yet each small step carries its own inherent worth. Patience blossoms because the journey itself becomes the reward. This patience is not empty waiting. It is an active, alert presence in every moment. One of the most liberating lessons this teaches us is freedom from fear. Attachment to results breeds anxiety, whispers of failure, questions of worth. What if I fall short? What if I never arrive? What if all my effort was for nothing? These doubts shadow each step. But when the outcome is released, fear loosens its grip. You act with greater courage because failure no longer defines you. The process itself is meaningful, regardless of how events unfold afterward. This realization births resilience, boldness, and inner strength. Such a principle also reshapes how we guide others. Parents, for example, who cling to outcomes often impose rigid expectations on their children, dictating who they should become, what careers they must pursue, which dreams they ought to fulfill. This creates pressure, distance, and strain. But parents who value the process instead cultivate curiosity, compassion, and perseverance in their children. They do not force them into fixed molds, but nurture within them the strength to walk their own authentic path. The result is trust, genuine connection, and relationships grounded in honesty. Detachment from outcomes also uncovers another truth. Much of life rests outside our control. Timing, circumstances, the choices of others, all of these shape results in ways we cannot command. To cling to outcomes is to demand mastery over what never belonged to us. To detach is to return to what does belong to us: our intention, our effort, our presence. From this clarity comes peace, for we cease fighting battles destined to be lost. Yet detachment does not mean the abandonment of all goals. Vision, planning, and direction remain. The difference lies in how we hold them, lightly, flexibly, with openness to change. We allow ourselves to adapt when life shifts. Our sense of identity no longer collapses when results differ from our expectations. Goals continue to guide us, but they do so without enslaving us. The focus returns always to walking well in the present rather than obsessing over distant horizons. In the end, balance is what matters. Surrender the fixation on the destination, but honor every moment of the journey. Detachment from outcomes liberates us from the chains of results, while commitment to the process anchors life in depth, integrity, and presence. Woven together, these truths create a life where effort is steady, peace flows consistently, and freedom is discovered not at the finish line, but in each step walked with open eyes and an open heart. And as we grow into this delicate dance, committing to the journey while releasing the destination, another insight emerges, subtle yet profound. It changes how we even understand detachment itself. For much of the path, we are taught to let go, to release desires, identities, possessions, and outcomes. But there is a deeper layer still. Sometimes even the effort to let go is its own struggle, another form of clinging in disguise. What if the true practice is not about forcing ourselves to release, but simply about allowing things to be as they are? The power of letting things be transforms detachment into something gentler, more organic, and infinitely more sustainable. For when we strain too hard to let go, resistance is born. But in letting be, peace quietly blossoms. The mind often whispers, "I should not feel this anger. I should not carry this desire. I must rid myself of this thought." Yet in that very attempt, the knot only tightens. The effort to push away becomes another form of grasping. We are still clinging not to the thought itself, but to the ideal of how things ought to be. The practice of letting be interrupts this endless cycle. It grants emotions, desires, and thoughts the simple permission to exist, without judgment, without suppression, without the urgency of reaction. And in that paradox, when we stop straining to expel them, they begin to loosen naturally. Freedom, then, does not always arrive through rejection. Often it flows from acceptance. Anger, when allowed to exist without being fed, eventually dissolves. Grief, when honored rather than resisted, gradually softens. Desire, when acknowledged without shame, eventually reveals its hidden lesson. By letting be, we cease adding fuel to the fire. We come to see that much of what torments us survives only because we keep wrestling with it. This principle extends beyond our inner world and reaches into our relationships. How often do we approach others with the subtle demand that they change, that they bend to our preferences, that they embody the image we have crafted of them? This pressure breeds conflict and tension. But when we allow people to be as they are, without forcing them into the mold of our expectations, relationships begin to breathe. This does not mean we abandon boundaries or tolerate harm. Rather, it means we honor the truth of another's being instead of clinging to an illusion. In that spaciousness, authenticity arises and connection deepens, free of the weight of control. Letting be also transforms the way we engage with discomfort in daily life. Modern culture teaches us to flee from unpleasant feelings, to medicate loneliness, distract from boredom, drown out restlessness. Yet what happens when we simply allow these states to exist? More often than not, they drift away like clouds, uncovering a deeper stillness beneath. In allowing them, we discover that they are not enemies, but passing weather in the vastness of the sky. This shift changes our relationship with the inner world. We react less, we fear less, and peace settles more easily within us. In spiritual practice, this lesson is especially vital. Many seekers, eager to advance, force themselves to suppress thoughts, crush desires, silence the mind. Yet this very force only deepens attachment. Real meditation is not the battle to erase thought. It is the simple act of observing the mind's movements as they are. To let the mind be is to allow space for its patterns to reveal themselves clearly. From that clarity, stillness arises of its own accord. This is why the masters say the mind is not broken and does not require fixing. It requires only spaciousness, only the freedom to move and eventually rest. This same principle reshapes our understanding of healing. Wounds do not mend because we demand them to. They close when we allow them to breathe, when we stop reopening them through resistance. Healing happens when we sit with pain without rushing to erase it. In the practice of letting be, the heart becomes a sanctuary, a place where suffering can soften and transform on its own time. It teaches patience, reminding us that wholeness is not forced into being by control, but unfolds gently through presence and tenderness. Finally, there is humility in letting be. To let go often feels like an accomplishment, a victory of will, a task completed. But letting be is less about achievement and more about surrender. It acknowledges the vastness of life, the truth that not everything can be pushed away, tamed, or fixed. Some things must simply be allowed. In this humility, we open ourselves to grace, the quiet unfolding of existence that surpasses our demands and our control. The practice also reveals an essential distinction, the difference between repression and release. Repression is the act of shoving something down, pretending it does not exist, burying it beneath layers of denial. Release, by contrast, is the art of allowing what arises to be present without binding ourselves to it. Letting be avoids the trap of repression by inviting full awareness. In this openness, nothing is denied, nothing is hidden, nothing is forced into exile. And it is precisely within this clarity that the grip naturally loosens. To let be does not mean to surrender into passivity. It is not the refusal to act when action is called for. Instead, it means acting from clarity rather than compulsion. For instance, when anger arises, letting be does not mean lashing out in blind reaction, nor does it mean pretending the anger does not exist. It means sitting with the heat of it, acknowledging its presence, and then choosing a response consciously rather than reacting automatically. It is in this space, between impulse and action, that true freedom is born. Even in uncertainty, the practice of letting be provides peace. Life's unpredictability often drives us into spirals of planning, worry, and attempts to control the uncontrollable. Yet so much of what we fear cannot be managed through effort alone. Letting be does not eliminate uncertainty, but it transforms our relationship with it. Instead of waging war against the unknown, we learn to rest within it. This is not resignation, but a profound acceptance, the courage to live fully without demanding absolute control. This principle expands outward into our relationship with the world itself. Much conflict arises from our refusal to let the world be as it is. We demand that politics mirror our ideals, that society evolve at the pace we prefer, that nature bend itself to our conveniences. Action is still necessary for change, but suffering multiplies when we insist that the world conform perfectly to our will. Letting be enables us to engage wisely, without drowning in frustration. It helps us hold the tension between striving for justice and accepting reality as it stands. The beauty of letting be is that it dissolves the ceaseless inner battle. Life does not need to be resisted at every turn. We can allow the flow of joy and sorrow, gain and loss, clarity and confusion. This openness does not weaken us, it strengthens us. Because when we no longer resist what is, we cease to be broken by it. Instead, we bend, we adapt, we endure. And so letting be emerges as a deeper form of detachment. Letting go loosens our grip on what we cling to. Letting be releases our struggle with what already exists. Together, they form a complete freedom. Freedom from clutching at the future and freedom from fighting the present. This freedom is not abstract. It is lived in every breath, every thought, every relationship. To let be is to walk through life with open hands and an open heart. It is to allow experiences to arise and fade without chains or cages. It is to realize that peace is never born from forcing life into our design, but from allowing life to unfold as it is. And in this allowing, we discover a quiet strength that no storm can shake. Yet after tasting the freedom that comes from letting things be instead of endlessly forcing them away, we encounter one of the most hidden and uncomfortable truths along the path. Sometimes, it is not our joy we cling to, not our possessions, not even our relationships, but our pain itself. As paradoxical as it may sound, many people cradle their suffering like a badge of identity, holding it close because it feels familiar, because it seems to offer meaning, because it becomes a story they know too well. To release, it feels like losing a piece of themselves. This attachment to suffering can be one of the most powerful chains, precisely because pain often masquerades as truth. Unlike wealth, desires, or external attachments, suffering disguises itself as reality. It weaves itself into the story of who we believe we are. A heartbreak becomes the identity of I am unlovable. A failure transforms into I am worthless. A betrayal hardens into I am always a victim. These are not merely memories of events. They crystallize into the foundation of self-image. And once the mind accepts them as identity, it clings even when the clinging cuts deep. Why does it persist? Because identity, however painful, often feels safer than the vast unknown of emptiness. It often feels easier to be someone wounded than to face the vast and uncertain space of who we might be without the wound. This attachment to suffering takes root partly in familiarity. Pain that repeats itself becomes strangely comfortable, almost like an old room whose every corner we know by heart. The mind grows accustomed to its contours, its rhythm, its weight. Joy, by contrast, feels foreign, almost threatening, because it does not fit the story we have carried for so long. When moments of peace or happiness arrive, they are often dismissed quickly. This won't last. This isn't who I am. The suffering, though heavy, feels like home. To step away from it means stepping into unfamiliar territory, and the mind instinctively resists. There is also a subtle, often hidden reward in suffering. Pain can draw sympathy, attention, even care from others. Without realizing it, people may cling to their wounds because those wounds bring validation. Letting go of suffering can feel like losing the comfort of being seen, the fragile assurance of being cared for. Yet this is a temporary comfort, one that depends on others continuing to feed the wound. Detachment invites us into a deeper freedom, a peace that does not rely on being perceived as broken, a strength that does not need to be constantly affirmed. On another level, attachment to suffering emerges from fear of responsibility. If we were to release our pain, we could no longer use it to explain away inaction or avoidance. The wound becomes a shield, an excuse. I cannot change because I am damaged. I cannot grow because I was hurt. In this way, suffering becomes both a prison and a refuge. Detachment shatters this shield, asking us to face life directly without excuses. This feels terrifying because it demands ownership of our choices. Yet it is also the only path to genuine freedom. The Buddhist teaching of the second arrow speaks precisely to this. The first arrow is life's unavoidable pain, loss, illness, disappointment. The second arrow is the one we shoot ourselves. The story we tell, the resistance we build, the identity we create around the pain. We cannot always escape the first arrow, but the second is optional, self-inflicted. And yet, many of us cling to that second arrow as though it were essential, as though it defines who we are. Detachment from suffering means laying down that second arrow, refusing to let it shape our identity. This requires courage. To release attachment to suffering is to step into the unknown of who we might be without it. It means risking joy, risking intimacy, risking a self that is new and unfamiliar. It means realizing that pain is not the essence of who we are, but only a passing state, something that has moved through us but does not define us. For the ego, this shift feels like a kind of death, because the ego clings tightly to being the one who suffers. But when we dare to leap beyond it, we find that beneath suffering lies a self unbroken, whole, luminous, defined not by wounds but by awareness itself. In relationships, attachment to suffering often takes the form of repeated cycles of conflict. Two people may replay the same arguments over and over, not because they want the pain, but because the pain confirms their story. One clings to the role of being ignored, the other to the role of being attacked. Both become prisoners of identities forged in suffering. The cycle only breaks when those roles are released. Letting go does not erase the past, but it frees the present from being an endless repetition of it. In personal growth, attachment to suffering often blocks transformation. A person may begin to meditate, to heal, to invite peace into their life. Yet when peace actually appears, the mind retreats. This is too strange. This is not who I am. Growth feels in that moment like a betrayal of the suffering self. Detachment here means daring to trust the unfamiliar, to allow peace to remain without sabotaging it. It means having the courage to become someone larger, freer, and more alive than the old wounds ever allowed us to be. Even society, in subtle and not so subtle ways, reinforces our attachment to suffering. Many cultures glorify victimhood or elevate martyrdom, rewarding those who display their pain while dismissing those who move gracefully beyond it. This creates an unspoken pressure to cling to suffering, as though wounds were the only proof of authenticity. But genuine authenticity is not found in endlessly showcasing scars. It is discovered in living fully beyond them. Detachment invites us to honor pain without turning it into identity. Healing becomes possible when we recognize suffering for what it truly is, an experience, not a definition. This means sitting with pain without weaving it into the story of me. Grief is grief. Anger is anger. Fear is fear. They are real, but they are not the whole of existence. When they are allowed to flow freely without being bound to self-image, they soften in their own time. The grip weakens not through force, but through recognition. This practice naturally deepens compassion. When we notice how tightly we cling to our own wounds, we begin to see with clarity how others do the same. We stop condemning people for being stuck, and instead we begin to understand the invisible chains that hold them. Compassion then flows not as pity, but as solidarity, as shared humanity. We know what it feels like to carry suffering as identity, and we recognize the courage required to release it. Detachment from suffering does not mean denial. It is not the act of pretending pain never happened, nor is it an erasure of history. Rather, it is the refusal to make pain the centerpiece of our identity. It is honoring the wound without building a permanent home within it. This distinction is vital. Denial buries pain in darkness where it festers. Detachment releases pain into the light where it can heal. One hides, the other frees. The deepest freedom emerges when we stop mistaking suffering for self and begin to see it as teacher. Each wound reveals where we cling, where we resist, where we fear. If we meet suffering with awareness rather than identity, it transforms into wisdom. Heartbreak whispers of impermanence. Failure teaches humility. Betrayal instructs discernment. Pain loses its grip because it no longer defines, it guides. Thus, emotional attachment to suffering is not weakness but misunderstanding. We cling because we confuse pain with identity, safety, or familiarity. But suffering is none of these things. It is a visitor, not a home. To detach from it is to step into life beyond the wound, a life defined not by scars but by presence. This freedom does not erase the past, it redeems it. It turns pain into strength and wounds into wisdom. When we stop clinging to suffering, we do not lose ourselves. On the contrary, we finally meet ourselves, not the self woven from stories and scars, but the self that has always been here, vast, whole, and free. And after seeing how suffering itself can be clung to as though it were identity, we encounter the same pattern in one of humanity's most beautiful expressions, creativity. Just as we grip pain because it defines us, we often grip recognition because it validates us. Artists, writers, musicians, and creators of every kind can become prisoners of praise, slaves to approval, or paralyzed by the fear of judgment. Yet creativity in its purest form does not bloom from applause, it blooms from freedom. Detachment here does not mean rejecting art or abandoning ambition. Rather, it means releasing the need for recognition so that the creative spirit can breathe without chains. When creativity is tethered to recognition, every brushstroke, every sentence, every performance carries the burden of expectation. The mind whispers, will they like it? Will it be enough? Will this prove my worth? In that space, art is no longer expression, it is calculation. The fear of rejection stifles risk, and the hunger for applause drains the joy from creation itself. Detachment dissolves this weight. It allows art to arise for its own sake, not for the reactions it may or may not provoke. The artist becomes liberated from the audience, anchored instead in the sacred act of creating. This liberation does not mean the artist refuses recognition. Recognition may still arrive, and when it does, it can be welcomed with gratitude. But it is no longer the fuel, no longer the measure of value. Detachment means that whether the work is praised, ignored, or criticized, the act of creating remains whole. This steadiness grants the artist the strength to continue, to explore, to evolve without being trapped by external judgment. The greatest works of human expression often emerge when creators detach from outcome. Many masterpieces were dismissed or ridiculed in their own time, only to be celebrated generations later. If those artists had tied their worth to immediate applause, their work might never have survived. Detachment shields creativity from the short-sightedness of society. It reminds the artist that value is not always visible in the present, and that the true purpose of creation is not applause but authenticity. Creativity thrives in play, experimentation, and risk. But when recognition dominates, risk feels dangerous. The artist retreats to what is safe, what sells, what pleases. Innovation withers in the grip of attachment. Detachment revives it. When the fear of failure loosens its hold, the creator dares to experiment, to make mistakes, to wander into the unknown. And in that wilderness of uncertainty, true originality is born. This principle extends beyond art. It applies to every form of creativity, problem-solving, leadership, innovation, even the daily art of living. When we detach from recognition, we stop censoring ourselves to fit expectations. Ideas flow more freely, unfiltered by fear of judgment. Detachment does not limit creativity, it expands it. It removes the chains of judgment and restores the freedom to imagine. There is also a deeper spiritual truth here. Creation itself is not possession but participation. It is life flowing through us. When we cling to recognition, we claim ownership of that flow, insisting it proves something about who we are. But in reality, creativity is less about control and more about openness. The painter does not invent beauty, they reveal it. The musician does not own the melody, they receive it. Detachment honors this flow, allowing it to move without suffocation from the ego. This does not mean skill, discipline, or refinement are unimportant. Detachment is not carelessness. It is the union of discipline with freedom, the practice of hunting craft with devotion while refusing to enslave the heart to applause. Discipline and detachment walk hand in hand. The detached creator works tirelessly, not to impress, but to give form to truth. Recognition, if it comes, is a gift, not a goal. Detachment also protects the spirit of the creator from despair. Recognition is fickle, tastes shift, trends vanish, audiences move on. If value is tethered to these unstable measures, the artist's heart rises and falls with every review. But when value rests in the act itself, the spirit remains steady. Criticism becomes guidance rather than devastation. Success becomes encouragement rather than addiction. This resilience sustains creativity across a lifetime. The power of detachment also transforms collaboration. When ego clings to recognition, collaboration becomes competition. Who gets credit? Whose vision dominates? But detachment dissolves this hunger. The focus shifts from ownership to shared creation, from mine to ours. In this openness, collaboration becomes fertile ground where diverse perspectives merge into something larger than any one individual could achieve. And yet for many, the deepest fear in creativity is not failure but invisibility, the fear that their work will be ignored, forgotten, lost in the noise of the world. Detachment addresses this fear at its root. It whispers that the act itself was already complete, already meaningful, regardless of who sees it. A flower does not bloom only if someone is watching. It blooms because blooming is its nature. In the same way, the detached artist creates as an expression of life itself, not a plea for attention. This shift also heals perfectionism. For perfectionism is nothing more than attachment disguised as discipline. The desperate need for a work to be flawless, polished beyond all imperfection, comes from the hunger for recognition. The hope is that perfection will guarantee applause, that flawlessness will shield the artist from rejection. But perfectionism suffocates creativity. It leads to endless revision, hesitation, or even abandonment. The work is never finished because it is never good enough. In truth, perfectionism does not protect art, it buries it. Detachment breaks this cycle. It allows imperfection not as carelessness but as authenticity. Life itself is not flawless. An art that mirrors life carries honesty. A painting with rough edges, a song with cracks in the voice, a poem with raw simplicity. These reveal humanity more than polished veneers ever could. By releasing the demand for perfection, the artist allows the work to live. And in return, creativity teaches detachment. Every creation, once released into the world, becomes something beyond the artist. A book is never just the author's, it becomes the readers who sees themselves reflected in its words. A song is never only the musician's, it becomes the listener's who hears it through the lens of their own joys and sorrows. An artwork, once displayed, takes on meanings the artist never intended. To cling to control is futile. Detachment honors this truth. The work no longer belongs to the creator alone. It belongs to the world. Cultivating detachment in creativity means returning to presence. To write, paint, sing, or build not for tomorrow's applause but for today's act. To sink so deeply into the moment of creation that time dissolves, the self disappears and only the flow remains. In this space, recognition is irrelevant. The act itself is the fulfillment. This presence is the heartbeat of creative freedom. Detachment in creativity, then, is not the death of ambition but its purification. It does not strip away vision or discipline. It refines them. It shifts the motivation from ego to expression, from fear to freedom. It protects against the poison of recognition without denying its sweetness. It sustains the spirit of the artist through seasons of failure, success, obscurity, and change. Detachment restores art to its essence, a celebration of being alive. When freed from the chains of applause, creativity regains its innocence. The kind of freedom children know when they build castles in the sand, scribble on paper, or hum a tune for the simple joy of it. No audience, no judgment, no need to be flawless, just pure expression. Detachment brings this innocence back to adulthood, a freedom to risk, to explore, to share without being crushed by silence or inflated by praise. This is why artists flourish when they let go of recognition. They return to the source itself. The wellspring of creation is not in approval, but in the unstoppable current of life that longs to move through us. To detach is to step back into that current. And after seeing how creativity blossoms when released from the grip of recognition, another layer of attachment reveals itself, one subtler, more hidden, and often more powerful. It is not found in possessions, achievements, or even in relationships. It resides in the very fabric of the mind. We cling not only to things but to thoughts, to ideas, to beliefs. These invisible attachments are the hardest to release because they disguise themselves as truth. Rarely do we admit, "This is my belief and I cling to it." Instead, we declare, "This is how things are." This rigidity of thought shuts the door to wisdom. It leaves no space for new understanding. Attachment to ideas offers the illusion of safety. Beliefs provide structure, identity, and a sense of stability in a world that is always changing. They tell us who we are, who others are, and how life should unfold. But when we grip them tightly, we go blind to perspectives that do not fit. Anything unfamiliar feels like a threat, not because it is false, but because it destabilizes the walls we built. Detachment from beliefs does not mean drifting in confusion or abandoning values. It means holding our thoughts lightly, knowing that wisdom requires flexibility. It means recognizing that a belief can be a guide but should not be a cage. For when the mind insists on being right, every disagreement becomes a battle. Conversations become wars, and truth is lost in the struggle for certainty. Relationships fracture and communities divide, not because people believe differently, but because they cling tightly to their beliefs as if identity itself depends on them. The diversity of thought is not the wound, it is the attachment that cuts so deep. Detachment softens this rigidity. It allows us to approach dialogue with humility, to listen without fear, and to change when new truth reveals itself. This openness is not weakness. It does not dilute conviction, it purifies it. For wisdom is strongest when it grows from reality rather than from the demands of ego. On a personal level, attachment to beliefs can become invisible chains. A person may hold the thought, I am not creative, I can never change, people cannot be trusted. These are not harmless ideas. They shape behavior, limit possibility, and quietly write the script of one's life. When reality offers evidence to the contrary, the mind dismisses it because clinging to the belief feels safer than questioning it. Detachment interrupts this cycle. It invites us to pause and ask, is this thought serving me or binding me? In that space, transformation becomes possible. Beliefs also bind identity, and identity resists change. One may cling to being the rational one, the achiever, or the victim. These labels offer a sense of certainty, but at great cost. They prevent us from experiencing the fullness of our being. Life is fluid, yet belief-bound identity tries to freeze it. Detachment loosens these labels, giving us permission to evolve without betraying ourselves. We discover we are not limited to one story. We are many stories, and beyond all of them, we are something larger still. This clinging becomes especially powerful in spiritual practice. Many hold tightly to beliefs about enlightenment, morality, or tradition, mistaking form for essence. Dogma replaces living truth. Even the Buddha warned against clinging to teachings, likening them to a raft, necessary to cross the river but not to be carried forever. Detachment from beliefs does not mean discarding wisdom. It means using it as a guide, not a prison. True wisdom arises not from memorizing doctrines, but from direct experience. The danger of rigid belief is that it narrows perception. We see only what confirms our view and push away what challenges it. Psychology names this confirmation bias, but Buddhism long ago recognized it as grasping at views. This grasping blinds us to reality. Detachment frees perception because life no longer has to fit our ideas. Instead of filtering experience through the lens of how it should be, we meet life as it is. In relationships, attachment to ideas creates friction. A couple may cling to rigid roles: who provides, who nurtures, who leads. These inherited beliefs suffocate connection, turning love into performance. Detachment, however, allows roles to shift naturally, shaped by circumstance and care rather than expectation. Where rigidity stifles, openness breathes life back into the bond. In society, clinging to ideology has fueled wars, oppression, and division. When groups grasp their beliefs so tightly that they dehumanize others, wisdom vanishes. Detachment here does not mean abandoning justice or compassion. It means holding even our deepest convictions with humility, knowing no single system captures the entirety of truth. This humility is not weakness, it is the soil in which peace can grow. Detachment from belief also nourishes curiosity. When we are not afraid to be wrong, we ask questions freely. We explore without needing certainty. Curiosity is the seed of wisdom, but it withers in the soil of rigidity. Letting go of the compulsion to defend every idea returns us to the openness of a student. We rediscover wonder, surprise, and the joy of learning. This practice does not leave us adrift. Detachment is not directionless. It does not strip away values, it refines them. Instead of clinging to beliefs as absolutes, we test them against lived reality, allowing them to grow or shift as needed. This flexibility makes values stronger, not weaker, because they are rooted in truth rather than dogma. On an inner level, letting go of rigid belief brings deep peace. Defending ideas is exhausting. The constant pressure to prove, argue, or protect drains the spirit. When we release this compulsion, we find spaciousness. We can still hold views, but we no longer carry them like shields. Instead, they rest lightly in our hands, guides for the journey, not cages for the soul. We rest more easily when we remember that truth is vast, and it does not require our control. Even within creativity, detachment from rigid beliefs plays a quiet but essential role. When an artist clings to the belief that art must look a certain way, their vision narrows and the work stagnates. When a writer clings too tightly to rules, their voice grows faint, mechanical, and strained. Detachment frees expression. It allows new forms to surface, new visions to unfold, and fresh truths to emerge. Beliefs can guide technique, but openness allows evolution. These invisible attachments to ideas and beliefs may, in fact, be some of the strongest chains we carry, precisely because they are hidden. They shape the way we see, the way we act, the way we love, and even the way we suffer. To loosen them is to reclaim freedom. Not freedom from thought itself, but freedom from rigidity. It is to live with beliefs as companions rather than as masters, as guides rather than as prisons. In this freedom, wisdom arises. Because wisdom never blossoms from defending what we already know. It blossoms from openness, from humility, from the courage to whisper, "Perhaps there is more." Detachment from belief does not empty the mind. Instead, it clears space for truth to enter. And in that uncluttered space, wisdom arrives naturally, like light pouring into a room once burdened with shadows and debris. And after uncovering how invisible attachments to beliefs quietly shape and limit our freedom, the path invites us to turn outward, to a teacher that has been with us all along, though too often overlooked. Where the human mind clings, nature releases. Where we resist change, nature moves in rhythm with it. Among the greatest teachers in this silent school are the trees. Trees live without rush, without resistance, without clinging. Through their seasonal cycles, they embody what it means to embrace impermanence. They do not let go as if losing, but as if participating in a sacred rhythm. In autumn, the tree does not fight to keep its leaves. Even though those leaves carried its beauty all summer long, it releases them one by one, without complaint, without bargaining, without fear. And yet, in the act of release, the tree does not become barren in spirit. It prepares itself for rest, for renewal, for another spring. This rhythm reveals what detachment truly looks like. To let go is not to die inside, but to honor the cycle of change. Humans, unlike trees, resist this rhythm. We cling desperately to the seasons of life, youth, relationships, achievements. Roles long past their natural time. When life whispers that it is time to release, we fight back. And in that resistance, suffering multiplies. The tree shows us another way, that every season has its gift. Growth, flowering, harvest, shedding, and rest. None is superior, all are essential. When we align with this truth, impermanence no longer terrifies us. It becomes the pulse of life itself. The lesson of the tree extends beyond seasons into every storm of existence. Watch how branches bend in the wind. They show us resilience born not from rigidity but from surrender. A tree does not resist each gust. It sways, it yields, it flows. This is the essence of detachment. To cling rigidly is to snap. To bend is to endure. Human life, filled with unexpected storms, calls for the same wisdom. Release the illusion of control. Flow with change, and strength will reveal itself. Even the roots of the tree speak their quiet wisdom. They sink deep into unseen earth, anchoring growth above. They remind us that true stability is not in clinging to what is visible, but in grounding ourselves in what is unseen: intention, presence, spirit. In the same way, when we loosen our grip on surface illusions, wealth, status, appearance. We uncover the deeper roots of being, values, presence, awareness. Detachment is not emptiness but depth. Just as a tree draws nourishment from hidden roots while shedding what is no longer needed above, we too can release the weight of outer clinging while anchoring ourselves in what truly sustains. Trees also embody patience. They do not force spring to arrive nor resist the quiet of winter. They trust the rhythm of nature, knowing that fruit ripens only when the conditions align. Humans often falter here, demanding results on our own schedules, impatient with waiting, restless with silence. The tree teaches us surrender to timing, a form of detachment that carries peace. By aligning with life's rhythm, we spend less energy in resistance and uncover calm even in the waiting. The cycle of shedding teaches another truth. Loss is not an ending but the beginning of renewal. The leaves that fall do not vanish in vain. They enrich the soil, feeding new life to come. Nothing in nature is wasted. In the same way, when we release attachments, the very act of letting go fertilizes growth. A broken relationship, a missed opportunity, an identity once clung to, each when released becomes nourishment for the next chapter. Detachment is not sterile, it is fertile. Observing nature also dissolves the illusion of permanence. Mountains crumble, rivers shift course, skies transform, forests rise and fall. The tree itself is never identical from one season to the next, and neither are we. Yet in our clinging, we demand constancy, demanding that life stay the same. Detachment is the practice of aligning with what nature already knows. Change is not a threat, but the essence of existence. The tree also teaches humility. It does not cling to recognition when it blooms, nor collapse in shame when it stands bare. Its worth is not tied to appearances. Each phase, flowering, fruiting, resting, is lived fully, without fear, without disguise. This humility is detachment from image, a reminder that our value does not depend on constant flowering. To be bare in winter is as sacred as to be lush in summer. In our modern lives, where speed and accumulation dominate, the wisdom of the tree feels radical. We chase growth without pause, success without stillness, youth without aging. But the tree flourishes because it honors rest as much as action. It knows that winter's stillness is as vital as summer's abundance. Detachment from the obsession with constant productivity allows us to rest without guilt, to see pauses not as failure but as preparation for renewal. The metaphor stretches further into relationships. Leaves fall not because the tree rejects them, but because their time is complete. In the same way, people and roles leave our lives. To cling is to resist the natural flow. Detachment does not mean coldness or indifference. It means honoring what was while allowing its departure. In this release, space is made for what is yet to come. Bare branches, though empty, are already preparing for new leaves. Finally, the wisdom of nature challenges our obsession with control. We prune, manipulate, and manage endlessly. Yet nature thrives most when allowed to flow. The tree does not command the sun, demand the rain, or order the seasons. It receives, it adapts, it endures. Its strength is born not of control, but of deep trust in the forces greater than itself. Detachment invites us to live as nature does, to stop demanding that life bend to our will and instead align ourselves with its currents. In this surrender lies an unsuspected strength. Even decay carries its lesson. The fallen tree does not vanish in failure. It nourishes the forest floor, becoming soil from which new growth rises. Death itself belongs to the cycle, yet we resist this truth, clinging to permanence, fearing endings. But nature shows that endings are also beginnings, that loss is never final but a doorway into transformation. Detachment from the illusion of eternal possession allows us to meet death, whether of people, moments, or identities, with grace instead of terror. To live like the tree is to wear impermanence with dignity, to grow when growth is called for, to release when release is asked, to rest when rest is given, and to let each season unfold without demanding it stay forever. This is not weakness but wisdom, the quiet rhythm of detachment lived not as theory but as being. The tree's way of letting go is not abandonment but flow. It is not indifference but harmony. It is not losing but transforming. By listening to nature, we remember what the restless mind forgets, that life is not a straight line but a circle, and freedom comes not from resisting the circle but from moving within it. In this way, every falling leaf, every storm that breaks, every winter that deepens becomes less a threat and more a teacher, reminding us that impermanence is not our enemy but the very path to peace. And after learning from the trees how to honor cycles of growth and release, another form of letting go calls us even further inward. This one hides not in possessions, not in relationships, not even in beliefs, but in the deepest chambers of the spiritual path. For many seekers, the journey brings glimpses of light, moments of vision, waves of bliss, flashes of clarity, and mystical states that feel like touching eternity itself. These experiences can be radiant, but they are also perilous if clung to. The mind, hungry for permanence, tries to seize them, to repeat them, to build an identity upon them. Yet the very grasping that clings to spiritual highs is the same grasping that obstructs awakening. True freedom requires detachment, even from the most sacred of states. Visions and mystical ecstasies can feel like proof, signs that progress is being made, that one is chosen, that enlightenment is near. But to cling to these states is like pausing halfway up a mountain, mistaking the view for the summit. The beauty is real, but it is not the destination. Detachment teaches us to honor such moments without becoming their prisoner. They are markers along the path, not the end of it. Bliss in meditation is one of the most common traps. In stillness, waves of joy and peace may arise so vast they feel like a rival. Yet attachment to bliss breeds suffering the moment it fades. The seeker begins to chase the state, to force it, to measure every meditation against the one where bliss appeared. This craving pulls the mind out of presence, away from awakening, and into obsession. Detachment, by contrast, lets us receive bliss with gratitude and release it without grief. Then the experience becomes nourishment instead of chain, food for the soul, not a cage for the spirit. Visions, too, can mislead. Mystical lights, symbolic imagery, inner voices, or overwhelming sensations may arise in practice. They can inspire, but they can just as easily inflate the ego. The thought creeps in, I have seen what others have not. I am chosen. I am advanced. This subtle clinging to identity is potent, for it quietly turns spiritual practice into yet another form of possession. Detachment reminds us that visions are never the goal. They are like dreams, sometimes rich with meaning, sometimes random, always transient. The awakened heart rests not in what is seen, but in the clarity that sees. Even profound awakenings can become prisons if they are grasped. A single moment of deep insight, when clung to, hardens into nostalgia or dogma. That was it. I must get it back. But awakening is not about returning to a frozen moment. It is about living in the truth that every moment arises and passes. To cling to a past awakening is to miss the living presence of now. Detachment frees us from chasing ghosts of enlightenment, making room for continuous unfolding instead of fixation. The Buddha himself warned against attachment to the jhana states, deep absorptions of meditation filled with bliss, clarity, or vast spaciousness. He recognized their beauty, yet taught that they are not the final liberation. To cling to them is to remain bound, intoxicated by temporary sweetness. Detachment invites us to use these states as supports, as nourishment for practice, but never as ends in themselves. They strengthen the mind, but they too must be released. This principle teaches humility. The ego, clever and insistent, can hijack spiritual experiences, claiming them as proof of advancement, superiority, or specialness. But detachment strips away that pride. It reminds us that mystical states are not trophies but gifts. They are not possessions but conditions, arising and passing like everything else. To hold them lightly is to remain grounded, humble, and open. Detachment from spiritual highs also protects us from despair. When seekers cling to past ecstasies, their absence breeds doubt. Why can't I get back to that state? Have I lost my way? This corrosive doubt gnaws at the practice itself. Detachment releases the comparison. Each meditation, each prayer, each moment stands on its own, precious not because it recreates the past, but because it is lived fully in the present. It also guards against dependency. Some begin chasing altered states through techniques, rituals, or even substances, mistaking these experiences for the essence of spirituality. But dependency enslaves. It narrows the path instead of widening it. Detachment reveals the deeper truth, that awakening is never tied to a particular condition. It is the awareness that exists before, during, and after every state. Mystical experiences may come and go like weather, but awareness remains as the sky itself. To rest in that awareness is the heart of true freedom. Detachment does not mean dismissing these luminous experiences. It means receiving them with gratitude and then releasing them without clinging. It is the delicate balance between honoring and letting go. In this way, every vision, every blissful absorption, every insight becomes a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block. They enrich the path but never define it. This practice deepens wisdom, for when we are no longer blinded by the dazzling glow of mystical states, the ordinary reveals its own sacredness. The sound of the wind rustling through leaves, the steady rhythm of breath, the warmth in a stranger's smile, these simple realities awaken us more steadily than any fleeting ecstasy. Detachment frees us from chasing fireworks, allowing us instead to rest in the quiet, enduring light of daily life. And in relationships, this wisdom shields us from spiritual arrogance. The one who clings to visions proclaims superiority, subtly elevating self above others. But the one who is detached honors the truth equally in all, recognizing that awakening is not about dazzling experiences, but about humility, presence, and love. Those who cling to mystical experiences often unknowingly create distance, setting themselves apart and imagining they stand above others. Yet detachment restores equality. It reminds us that every soul walks a unique path, that spiritual worth is not measured by visions or voices or fleeting states of bliss, but by compassion lived in the quiet fabric of daily life. This humility nurtures connection instead of separation. It brings people closer, not through dazzling experiences, but through kindness, patience, and love. Detachment from spiritual experiences also sustains practice for the long journey. Without detachment, the ups and downs of mystical states create instability, pulling the seeker into cycles of craving when bliss is present and despair when it fades. With detachment, practice becomes steady, like a river that continues to flow whether skies are clear or storms arrive. The seeker remains present, committed, and free from the roller coaster of grasping and disappointment. And so, non-attachment to spiritual experiences becomes one of the most profound forms of liberation. It asks us to release even the most luminous states, to see them as passing, to refuse the temptation of building identity around them. In this release, the path opens clearly. Awakening is not discovered by clinging to light, bliss, or visions, but in the awareness that quietly holds all states without grasping. This awareness can never be lost because it was never dependent on experience. It is the ground of being itself, the presence beneath all conditions. And after realizing that even the most radiant spiritual experiences must be held lightly, the question deepens. What kind of strength is required to release something we once believed defined our awakening? For many, detachment is misunderstood as weakness, as though letting go were an act of avoidance, a turning away from life, or a refusal to care. But the truth is the opposite. Detachment is not escape. Detachment is courage. It takes immense strength to face reality as it truly is, to unclench the fists of attachment, to release what the heart desperately longs to keep. Letting go is not for the faint of heart. It is an act of bravery that opens the way to freedom. The courage of detachment begins with honesty. It requires strength to admit when something has ended, when a relationship has run its natural course, when a chapter of life is closing. The mind prefers denial, weaving stories of maybe it will last, maybe it will return. Clinging feels easier because it postpones grief. But to let go is to confront the truth directly. It is to allow ourselves to feel the ache of impermanence without numbing, without pretending. This is not avoidance. It is the raw courage of presence. It also takes courage to release identities we have outgrown. To detach from an old version of ourselves means stepping into the unknown. We cling to labels: successful, needed, spiritual, strong, because they shield us from uncertainty. Yet life continually calls us to evolve. The courage of detachment is the willingness to shed these skins and trust that who we are becoming is not a loss but a deepening. Escape resists growth. Courage embraces it. Another form of bravery lies in letting go of resentment. Anger can feel like power. Bitterness can feel like protection. Holding a grudge can seem safer than opening to forgiveness. To detach from these heavy emotions feels vulnerable, almost like surrendering a weapon. But courage is not found in clutching the blade. It is found in laying it down. It is the strength to choose peace over the illusion of control. This choice demands more fortitude than clinging ever could. Detachment also asks for courage in love. To love deeply, yet without grasping. To cherish another soul while still honoring their freedom. To let them walk their own path, even when it diverges from ours. This is not avoidance. It is the strength to love without possession. Many believe that courage is holding on tightly. But the greater courage is to open the hand and still love fully, knowing nothing is guaranteed. Even in work and ambition, detachment requires strength. It asks us to pour effort wholeheartedly into the process while refusing to chain our worth to the outcome. It is easy to avoid risk, to escape failure by never trying. But it takes courage to act with full devotion, knowing that results may not align with desire. Detachment here is not apathy. It is fierce engagement without enslavement to results. Courage is not found in guaranteeing success, but in remaining free whether success arrives or not. True bravery lies in the ability to act wholeheartedly, to give your best effort, and yet remain unattached to the outcome. To detach from results is to embrace uncertainty with strength rather than shrink from it. It is the willingness to stand in the unknown without demanding certainty as a condition for peace. Even in grief, detachment reveals itself as courage. To lose someone or something precious and still choose to keep living, still choose to keep loving, is perhaps the bravest act of all. Escape numbs, courage feels. Escape hides, courage faces. Detachment in grief does not mean coldness or indifference. It is not about shutting down the heart. Rather, it is the strength to walk with sorrow without being consumed by it. It is the heart's way of saying, "This hurts, and yet I will not close myself to life." Detachment also requires courage because it challenges the expectations of society. The world often mistakes clinging for loyalty, possession for love, accumulation for success. To detach is to swim against these currents, to live with open hands in a world of clenched fists. This demands not only inner strength but also resilience against misunderstanding, judgment, and even criticism. Detachment is not passive resignation. It is active resistance to illusions that enslave. The courage of detachment is rarely loud or dramatic. It is quiet, steady, often invisible. It reveals itself in the person who chooses peace instead of revenge, who releases a dream that no longer serves, who forgives without being asked, who accepts endings without bitterness. These choices may not seem grand from the outside, but they are profound expressions of strength and integrity. This courage is rooted in trust. To let go requires faith that life will continue to unfold, that something new will arise, that emptiness will not destroy us but instead create space for growth. Fear whispers, "If I release, I will be left with nothing." But courage answers, "If I release, I will be free to receive." This trust is not naive optimism. It is born from lived experience, from seeing again and again that life does not end at loss but transforms through it. On the spiritual path, detachment as courage becomes essential. Awakening is not about escaping the world but about seeing it clearly. It takes immense strength to let go of cherished illusions, to face impermanence without flinching, to stand within the vastness of uncertainty without clinging to fixed ground. This is why detachment is never cowardice but deep bravery. The bravery to live without guarantees, without anchors, without illusions. And so detachment is courage precisely because it demands engagement, not avoidance. It asks us to feel more deeply, not less. It asks us to release control, not to escape responsibility. It asks us to face impermanence without denial, to walk into the unknown without trembling, to love without possession. This is the quiet heroism of the detached heart. Such a heart does not run from life. It meets life fully, freely, without fear of loss. And after recognizing that detachment is not escape but courage, another layer of truth unfolds, one we often overlook. For even if we loosen our grip on wealth, success, or identity, there remains a place where attachment hides with remarkable skill, in the ways we relate to others. Relationships are powerful mirrors. They reflect back the parts of ourselves we would rather not see, and through them, our deepest attachments are often revealed. Exposing attachments we thought we had already outgrown, relationships shine a relentless light on the places we are still bound. The conflicts we face, the longing we carry, the sting of distance, or the dread of loss, these are never just about the other person. They are about us. They reveal the invisible knots of clinging that remain within our own hearts. Every argument with a partner, friend, or family member is more than an exchange of words. It is a flashlight aimed into the shadowed corners of attachment. When criticism stings and anger flares, the wound is not usually to truth itself but to identity, our attachment to being seen a certain way. When jealousy rises, it is not only about the other's actions but about our fear of being replaced, our clinging to possession, our terror of loss. These emotional eruptions expose where freedom has not yet reached. Longing speaks the same language. Desperation for someone's attention, approval, or affection often disguises a deeper bondage. The belief that our worth depends on being wanted, that safety exists only when others remain near. In such moments, the other person is not the source of our insecurity, but the mirror reflecting the chain we ourselves have fastened. Without relationships, these chains might remain invisible. With them, the truth is revealed with a clarity too sharp to dismiss. The Buddha taught often that relationships are fertile ground for awakening precisely because they constantly test our illusions. Alone, detachment can feel easy, but in the company of others, hidden grasping rushes to the surface. For this reason, conflict is not proof of failure but a profound teacher. Each clash of ego against ego offers the chance to ask, what am I clinging to right now? What story about myself or the other am I refusing to release? Attachment also reveals itself in the expectations we place on those we love. We craft silent contracts without ever speaking them aloud. If I give you love, you must return it. If I support you, you must appreciate me. If I remain loyal, you must never change. These unspoken bargains sow suffering because others are never bound to play the roles we have written for them. When they break script, we feel betrayed, not by their choices, but by our own attachment to expectations. Detachment here means to love without demanding, to give without bargaining, to care without turning intimacy into transaction. Even joys can disguise attachment. The sweetness of being loved curdles into fear when we grasp at it, terrified it might vanish. The glow of admiration turns to prison bars when our worth becomes dependent on praise. Detachment does not mean refusing joy, but savoring it without chaining peace to its presence. To love fully while knowing the other is free to change, or to leave, is one of the most courageous expressions of detachment. Relationships also reveal the projections we cast onto others. So often what we cannot bear in another is what we have not yet accepted in ourselves. A partner's stubbornness irritates us because it echoes our own resistance. A friend's neediness frustrates us because it mirrors the parts of us still hungry for reassurance. These projections are not accidents, they are invitations. They reveal the attachments we hold to certain self-images, the qualities we refuse to embrace as part of our shared humanity. Detachment allows us to meet these mirrors not with shame but with compassion. Instead of turning away, we learn to see clearly, to accept what is reflected, and to use it as an opening for growth. In this way, every conflict, every longing, every pang of jealousy becomes not an obstacle but a teacher, guiding us deeper into freedom. In families, attachments often grow roots so deep they feel inseparable from love itself. Parents may cling to the belief that children must walk a particular path, mistaking control for care, direction for devotion. Children, in turn, may cling to the hunger for approval, tying their sense of worth to the shifting tides of parental validation. These invisible contracts create cycles of suffering, patterns repeated across generations like echoes. Detachment in family bonds does not mean indifference or cold distance. It is not neglect. It is the loosening of chains disguised as expectations so that love may flow more freely. In this loosening, relationships shift their foundation, from control to respect, from fear to trust, from possession to presence. Romantic love is perhaps the sharpest mirror of all. Few other relationships awaken longing, vulnerability, and fear so powerfully. Within it, attachment often hides beneath the mask of passion. The grasping for permanence disguises itself as devotion. Detachment here does not mean withholding tenderness or avoiding intimacy. It means offering love without chains, holding another not as property but as a gift. It means allowing closeness while respecting freedom, cherishing presence without demanding permanence. This is not a lesser love but a deeper one, because it is rooted in choice rather than control, in freedom rather than fear. Friendships, too, reveal hidden grasping. When we feel abandoned because a friend has grown distant, it often points to our attachment to the belief that connection must remain unchanged. Yet life itself is change. Detachment invites us to honor the natural ebb and flow of closeness, to treasure what is present without resenting what is past. Such openness prevents bitterness, allowing friendships to evolve organically, sometimes growing closer, sometimes drifting apart, but always authentic in the season they belong to. Work relationships also serve as mirrors, though often in subtler ways. Conflicts with colleagues may uncover attachments to recognition, control, or superiority. The sting of another's success reveals the ego's hunger for comparison, its belief that worth can only be measured in competition. Detachment here means showing up with diligence and integrity, engaging fully in the work, yet releasing the ego's demand to always be ahead. Even professional spaces, when viewed with this lens, become arenas of spiritual practice, training grounds where humility and freedom can be cultivated. The mirror is equally sharp in longing for love we do not yet have. When we ache for another to complete us, it reveals our hidden attachment to the story of incompleteness. This longing is not shameful, it is profoundly human, but it is also a teacher. It urges us to turn inward, to examine the places where we cling to external validation rather than nurturing inner wholeness. Detachment here allows us to welcome love when it arrives but remain whole and steady when it does not. Even silence in relationships becomes a teacher. When someone withdraws, leaving us anxious or desperate, the discomfort often speaks less about their absence and more about our own attachment to control, our fear of abandonment. Detachment in these moments means sitting with the unease of uncertainty, learning to trust that we remain whole even when connection falters, trusting that our worth does not vanish when attention is withdrawn. Ultimately, relationships are not obstacles to detachment but catalysts for it. They reveal what solitude often conceals. Conflict uncovers where the ego still clings. Longing exposes where insecurity still binds. Expectations show where we demand permanence from what is fleeting. Projection reveals the aspects of ourselves we have not yet embraced. To approach relationships as mirrors is to transform them into teachers, to let every interaction illuminate another chain ready to be released. This practice does not cool love or create distance. Quite the opposite, it breathes life into connection. When we stop clinging, we stop suffocating others with demands. Love becomes freer, respect deeper, presence more genuine. Relationships rooted in detachment are not weaker for it. They are stronger, precisely because they are no longer built upon chains but upon freedom. So the mirror of relationships reveals a truth we cannot ignore. Every conflict, every longing, every ache of the heart is never only about the other. It is about us. It is our own hidden clinging reflected back through another's presence. To meet these reflections with detachment is not to withdraw from love, but to grow within it, to free ourselves from chains we did not know we carried. In doing so, we discover a love unburdened by possession and a connection no longer ruled by fear. Relationships cease to be battlegrounds of ego and expectation, and instead transform into sacred classrooms of awakening. Detachment is not about abandoning life. It is about stepping into life more fully, eyes open, hands open, heart unbound. Through every lesson we have explored, whether it was learning the difference between detachment and indifference, loosening the grip of timelines, softening the weight of identity, accepting the flow of impermanence, loving without possession, or even releasing the pull of spiritual highs, the same truth has echoed again and again. Freedom is never born from clinging. It is born from allowing. Pain teaches us by revealing the knots where we hold on too tightly. Nature, in her quiet wisdom, shows us what it means to let go with grace. And the deepest teachings remind us of this simple but powerful law. What is truly meant for you will never have to be forced. Detachment, then, is not weakness. It is strength refined into stillness. It is not escape. It is engagement without chains. To live in this way is to discover joy not in some distant goal, but in the process itself. It is to rest in peace, not in tomorrow, but in this very present breath. It is to find strength not by resisting change, but by moving with it, trusting its rhythm. This is the heart of the Buddhist path, not to deny life, not to suppress desire, not to numb the ache of impermanence, but to embrace everything as it is, without fear of loss and without the desperation for control. Now I turn the reflection toward you. Which part of detachment speaks most deeply to your journey? Was it the courage it takes to let go, the quiet freedom that forgiveness brings, or perhaps the reminder from nature that every season has its purpose and every ending prepares the way for a beginning? Share your reflections in the comments below. I read each one with care, and your insights enrich this path for everyone who walks it. And if these words have touched something within you, consider subscribing to the channel and tapping the bell icon, so that each new lesson on clarity, freedom, and peace arrives gently in your life. Your next step on this journey may already be waiting in the next video.